Chapter 2401. When he heard Dedeabi's words, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He had to admit that when Xiao Ta acted tough, he couldn't take it anymore. Dedeabi continued, in short, young master, you can study this human word. This word, together with your green Xian sword, will be invincible. Especially when your sword will and the human word are combined, the power will be endless. Yi Xian asked in a low voice, can it be combined with my instant of invincibility? Dedeabi smiled. Of course. Yi Xian nodded and looked at the human word in his hand. After a while, Yi Xian entered Xiao Ta. Inside Xiao Ta, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. He began to feel the human word through the green Xian sword. Human? Sages? Yi Xian was curious about Dedeabi's human and the sages. However, Dedeabi obviously didn't dare to tell him, so he didn't press him. The human word had merged with the green Xian sword. Therefore, he could feel the human word through the green Xian sword. After a long time, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly narrowed. The next moment, he disappeared inside Xiao Ta. Boom! All of a sudden, Yi Xian found himself in a strange world. Yi Xian looked around. At that moment, he was in a desolate world. He was surrounded by endless mountains. There were trees that towered into the clouds, blocking out the sun. Boom! At that moment, the entire ground suddenly shook violently. Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. At the end of his vision, he saw a huge demonic beast. This demonic beast had the shape of a human. It had 2 legs, a head like an ox, and 1 eye. This demonic beast was the biggest one Yi Xian had ever seen. The mountains that were tens of thousands of feet tall were like children in front of it. Seeing this demonic beast, Yi Xian frowned. Dedeabi, what is this place? After a moment of silence, Dedeabi said, the world of the word human. A world of words? Yi Xian was stunned. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head. A blood-red rock had appeared in the distance, and it was flying towards him. At the instant that the rock unfolded its wings, the entire heavens and the earth instantly darkened like night. As the rock flew past, it suddenly glanced downwards. However, it quickly retracted its gaze and soon disappeared into the horizon. Yi Xian said, did it see me just now? Dedeabi said, yes. Yi Xian was puzzled. Then why didn't it hit me? After a brief silence, Dedeabi said, are you used to being targeted? Do you have persecutory delusions? Yi Xian was speechless. Dedeabi said in a low voice, it has no enmity with you. Why would it target you? Yi Xian was silent for a moment before he said, I'm not used to it. Dedeabi was speechless. Yi Xian looked around and said, is it the word human that brought me here? Dedeabi said, yes. Yi Xian was curious. Why did it bring me here? Dedeabi said, I don't know. Yi Xian frowned. Are you not familiar with it? Dedeabi said, no. Yi Xian was speechless. He looked around and opened his palm. The green profound sword appeared in his hand. He looked at the word human on the sword. You have a spirit, right? The word human trembled slightly in response. Yi Xian smiled. Can you transform? The word human suddenly transformed into a shadow and appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian threw that human spirit a look. Then he said with a smile, why did you bring me here? The human spirit was silent for a moment before it said, human, can I speak the truth? Yi Xian nodded. Of course. The human spirit said, you're too weak. I don't want to follow you. The smile on Yi Xian's face froze. The human spirit continued. Can you set me free? Yi Xian said indifferently, you don't want to follow me? The human spirit said, yes. Yi Xian smiled. I'm weak now, but I'll become strong in the future. The human spirit hesitated for a moment before it said, being weak is secondary. The main thing is, at this point, it suddenly stopped. Yi Xian pressed. What's the main thing? The human spirit said in a low voice, the main thing is that your skin is too thick. I can't stand following you. Fuck. Yi Xian's expression instantly turned cold. Haha. The great Tao brush suddenly laughed. It was a very happy laugh. Yi Xian shrugged. Then leave. The human spirit hurriedly said, really? Yi Xian nodded. Don't worry. I won't let Qing or hit you. Leave. The human spirit said happily, human, is what you said true? You really won't let that woman hit me? Yi Xian fell silent. Damn it. This fellow doesn't seem to understand irony. What should I do? The human spirit said again, human, then I'm leaving. Yi Xian was speechless. The human spirit was about to leave. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, is my younger sister's temper good? The human spirit hesitated for a moment, and then said, is it that woman in a plain dress? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The human spirit hurriedly said, not good, not good. Her temper isn't good at all. She attacks at the slightest provocation. We can't beat her. She's too terrifying. There was fear in his voice. Yi Xian said seriously, then if you leave, do you think she'll be angry? The human spirit hesitated for a moment, and then said, didn't you say that you won't let her hit me? Yi Xian smiled. But what if she wants to hit you herself? Then what should I do? The human spirit said, then tell her not to hit me. Yi Xian fell silent. This human spirit seemed to be quite pure. The human spirit said again, can I? Yi Xian sighed softly. She doesn't listen to me. The human spirit fell silent. Yi Xian smiled. How about this? Follow me for 3 years. After 3 years, I guarantee that she won't hit you. What do you think? The human spirit said, 3 years? Yi Xian nodded and said seriously, just 3 years. In these 3 years, follow me. After 3 years, you can leave on your own. The human spirit thought for a long time before saying, really? Yi Xian smiled. Of course, I never lie. The human spirit fell silent for a moment before saying, but, I feel that your skin is very thick. Moreover, you often trick others. Will you trick me too? Yi Xian's expression froze. The human spirit said again, don't swear. I know that with that big sister in a plain dress protecting you, an oath can't bind you at all. So. Yi Xian said solemnly, I guarantee it on my character. The human spirit said, you don't seem to. Yi Xian, the human spirit said, however, I'm still willing to believe you. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The human spirit said seriously, I'm afraid that you'll ask your sister to hit me. I can't beat your sister. Yi Xian was silent. Suddenly, he felt that he had gone a bit too far, as if he was bullying a spirit. The human spirit suddenly said, since you're called Yi Xian, then I'll call you Little Xian. Little Xian, do you know where this place is? Yi Xian said solemnly, Dedeabi said it's in your world. The human spirit nodded. Yes. This is the human world, a human world that was preserved by the previous master with supreme divine abilities. This is the universe beyond the current universe and the boundless universe. Let's go, I'll bring you to meet a few sages. After saying that, it turned and floated into the distance. Yi Xian followed. Along the way, Yi Xian saw many demon beasts. Yi Xian couldn't help but ask, human spirit, are these demon beasts powerful? The human spirit said, they can kill you with a slap now. Yi Xian's expression was calm. I don't believe it. The human spirit stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. Do you want to give it a try? Yi Xian laughed. Let's give it a try. The human spirit nodded and suddenly looked at the distant horizon. Owl demon. As soon as he finished speaking, the space in the distance suddenly split open, and in the next moment, a demonic beast charged out. This demonic beast was shaped like an eagle, and it wasn't very large. It had 3 heads, and each head had a single eye. It was extremely strange. The human spirit said, "Fight him." After saying that, it paused for a moment before saying, "Don't kill him. If you kill him, his sister will kill you. You can't beat his sister." Yi Xian, the owl demon, looked at Yi Xian. Attack. It could speak human language. Yi Xian thought about it and opened his palm. Xiao Ta appeared in his hand. He looked at Xiao Ta and said seriously, "Xiao Ta, you always say that you're invincible under 3 swords. Do you want to give it a try?" Xiao Ta said in a low voice, "Young master, are you going to trick me like this?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Why would I? I think you're very powerful. If you don't use 3 swords, who can do anything to you? You haven't shown your strength before. This is a good chance. Do you want to play with it?" Xiao Ta said, "I don't want to." Yi Xian didn't understand. "Why?" Xiao Ta said calmly, "Young master, do I look like an idiot to you?" Yi Xian, at this moment, the owl demon suddenly said, "The 2 of you, master and servant, come at me together." Together. Yi Xian glanced at the owl demon. Damn, it's so arrogant. Yi Xian opened his palm and the green profound sword appeared in his hand. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian asked in his heart, "Brother Bai, can I beat it?" De Daobi said calmly, "You can try." Yi Xian laughed. "Then I'll give it a try." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared on the spot. Chi. A sword ray suddenly tore through the battlefield. At this moment, the sword ray suddenly exploded. The next moment, a figure was sent flying hundreds of thousands of feet away. Along the way, this figure crashed through almost 100 mountains. This figure was Yi Xian. After Yi Xian stopped, he looked down at his chest. There was a shallow mark on his chest armor. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian looked up at the owl demon in the distance. The owl demon said calmly, "Human, I only used less than 10% of my strength." 10%. Yi Xian looked at the mortal spirit. The mortal spirit appeared in front of Yi Xian, and it said seriously, "It's telling the truth." Yi Xian was speechless. The mortal spirit hesitated for a moment before it said, "Little Xian, we're actually quite strong. There's also Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai's main body can kill you with ease, it just keeps a low profile." It paused for a moment before it continued, "Do you understand what I mean?" Yi Xian glanced at the battlefield, and then he smiled, "I do. From now on, all of you will listen to my orders, right?" The mortal spirit, Yi Xian said seriously, "Don't worry, I won't let my younger sister hit all of you." The mortal spirit hesitated for a moment before it said, "What I mean is, you should respect us a little." Yi Xian said seriously, "I understand. From now on, we're all good brothers. We'll share weal and woe together. You'll help me fight, right?" The human spirit said, That's not what I meant. P.S. 7017K. Chapter 2402. Sigh. De Daobi sighed softly. How could a simple human spirit be a match for the cunning Yi Xian? Yi Xian smiled and said, "Let's not talk so much. Let's go meet the sage of the human race." The human spirit thought for a moment and nodded. "All right." With that, it turned around and floated into the distance. Yi Xian glanced at the demon owl, and the demon owl looked back at him. Yi Xian smiled and said, "We'll meet again." With that, he followed the human spirit in the distance. After a moment of silence, the demon owl said, "A fellow with backing." I can't afford to offend him. With that, it turned around and disappeared into the horizon. Under the lead of the human spirit, Yi Xian arrived in front of a cave. Yi Xian looked at the human spirit. Why are you bringing me to meet the sage? Just as the human spirit was about to speak, a white-robed old man suddenly walked out from the cave in the distance. The old man wore a white robe. Not only that, his hair was snow-white as well, and he gave off a sage-like demeanor. Of course, it was just a phantom. It wasn't his main body. After the white-robed old man walked out, the human spirit immediately flew in front of the old man and seemed very intimate. The old man looked at Yi Xian and smiled. King Kaoshan. Yi Xian's face darkened. Damn it. When did my nickname become so famous? The old man sized Yi Xian up and then said with a smile, I heard that you founded an academy. Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The old man stroked his beard and smiled. I've heard of your academy. That's why I got the human spirit to bring you to see me. Yi Xian smiled. May I know what Senior has to say? The old man chuckled. I know that your identity is very special. Even the master of the human spirit can't do anything to you. I brought you here this time to give you some help. Yi Xian was slightly curious. Help? The old man nodded and opened his palm. In an instant, a terrifying power of faith appeared in his hand. Yi Xian's pupils constricted when he saw this energy of faith because he'd never seen such terrifying energy of faith. The power of faith alone was enough to make him feel the aura of death. The old man smiled and said, What did you feel? Yi Xian said solemnly, Powerful. The old man shook his head. Anything else? Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, Please enlighten me, Senior. The old man smiled and said, It's true. Pure. Yi Xian was silent. The old man said softly, The more real and pure the power of faith, the stronger it is. As he said that, he pointed his finger gently. In an instant, the human realm sword intent within Yi Xian's body suddenly surged out. Boom! The sword will of the human realm pierced through the clouds and shook the heavens and earth. The old man said softly when he saw Yi Xian's sword will of the human realm, Your power of faith is very good. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian and smiled, Looks like my worries were unnecessary. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, are you worried that my power of faith was obtained through deception? The old man nodded. Yes. They say that you like to deceive people and are very thick-skinned. Yi Xian's face instantly darkened. Little Bai, did you say that? Dedeabi hurriedly said, Don't blame me. I won't spread rumors. Yi Xian said, Then how do they know about all this nonsense? Dedeabi hesitated for a moment and said, You're actually quite famous in our circle. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Why? Dedeabi said indifferently, I won't say. Yi Xian, Xiao Ta suddenly said, You're definitely the one who's tarnishing the young master's reputation. Dedeabi sighed softly, Does his reputation still need to be tarnished? Huh? Xiao Ta, at this moment, the old man in front of Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, Little fellow, come with me for a walk. I'll give you a gift later. Hearing this, Yi Xian hurriedly said, Yes, yes. Senior, please. The old man laughed heartily, Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, he led Yi Xian towards the distance. On the way, the old man smiled and said, Little brother, do you know about the human race? Yi Xian nodded, I do. The old man shook his head, No, the human race I'm talking about is different from the human race you know. Yi Xian frowned slightly, What do you mean? The old man said softly, There's an era. Do you know what era it is? Yi Xian fell silent. If you don't tell me, how would I know? The old man smiled and said, That era is the era closest to Master Dedeabi, which is the era when the current universe and the boundless universe were just born. In the beginning, there was no such thing as a universe, only chaos. Yi Xian said solemnly, was it Master de Daobi who broke the universe? The old man shook his head, no. Yi Xian was a little curious, then? The old man smiled and said, a sage, he broke the chaos, and then there was this current universe and the boundless universe. Yi Xian said solemnly, what about Master de Daobi? What did he do? The old man shook his head, he didn't do anything. Yi Xian, the old man said softly, the human race had a great disaster, and that time, the human race was almost destroyed. Not only the human race, but even the myriad races were almost destroyed. As he spoke, a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. Yi Xian was a little curious, what was difficult? After a moment of silence, the old man said, the real disaster. Yi Xian was speechless. Can this guy just finish what he wants to say? The old man smiled and said, you can say that the human race I'm talking about is the first batch of humans in the current universe and the boundless universe. We are the first civilization after the birth of these two universes. To put it simply, we are the beginning of civilization. All martial arts and civilization originated from our era. Our era is also known as the era of the myriad races. Yi Xian said, was Master de Daobi also from that era? The old man shook his head, he wasn't, he transcended everything. Yi Xian frowned slightly, transcended everything? The old man nodded with a solemn expression. Yi Xian hesitated and said, is he very powerful? The old man stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian, you don't think he's powerful? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, I've seen him once, he's very modest. Xiao Ta said, young master, that's because you're following Sister Tian Ming. If you follow Sister Tian Ming, everyone will be very easygoing. Yi Xian was speechless. The old man shook his head and smiled, young brother, do you know what kind of existence de Daobi's master is? Yi Xian shook his head, I really don't know. The old man was silent for a moment, then said, in any case, he's a very terrifying existence, an existence that can't be described with words, and he transcends everything. Yi Xian was a little puzzled, Xiao Bai, your master is so powerful, why can't he beat Qing? De Daobi was silent for a moment, then said, I don't know. Xiao Ta suddenly laughed, Sister Qing, the eternal god. At this moment, the old man beside Yi Xian suddenly said, young friend, you're a human, right? Yi Xian nodded, yes. The old man nodded, then you'll have to carry the banner of the human race in the future. Huh? Yi Xian suddenly felt that something was wrong, he turned to look at the old man, Senior, I'll carry the banner of the human race? The old man nodded, yes. Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head, such a heavy responsibility, if there's no benefit, I'll never. At this point, he hurriedly stopped, a little embarrassed, damn, I accidentally let it slip. The old man laughed, young friend, do you want benefits? Yi Xian said seriously, Senior, I'm not that kind of person. The old man nodded, I understand. Yi Xian was speechless. The old man smiled, if you're willing to carry the banner of the human race, we can give you a lot of benefits. Yi Xian subconsciously asked, what benefits? The old man blinked, the treasure of the human race. The treasure of the human race. Yi Xian suddenly became a little excited, can I take a look first? Yi Xian, was not a person who could be fooled, if he didn't show the treasure first, he wouldn't work even if he was beaten to death. At this time, the human spirit suddenly said, Little Xian, if you want to become a sage, you must have a selfless heart, you can't become a sage with such a snobbish attitude. Yi Xian smiled, I don't want to become a sage. Little Xian was puzzled, why? Yi Xian smiled, becoming a sage is too tiring. The old man suddenly laughed, young friend, you're right, becoming a sage is really too tiring. Many times, the position of sage itself is a kind of restraint, a restraint on the heart. Yi Xian smiled, not saying a word. The old man continued, the human race has a lot of treasures, moreover, there is a mysterious human army that we left behind, this army is now in deep sleep, if you become the king of the human race, they will listen to your orders and respect you. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, how strong? The old man smiled, any one of them can beat countless people like you. Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. Am I still very weak? The old man laughed, not saying a word. Yi Xian asked in his heart, the deity, tell me, how big is the gap between me and Qing? After a moment of silence, the deity said, this question is beyond my scope of knowledge, I can't answer it. Yi Xian, at this time, the old man opened his palm, a seal appeared in his hand, he looked at Yi Xian, do you know what seal this is? Yi Xian shook his head. The old man smiled, Human King's sacred seal. This seal can increase the power of faith by 50%, other than that, this seal can also gather the power of faith of the human race, the kind that is endless. Most importantly, this seal can directly confer any living being as a god, giving them godhood. Yi Xian was a little confused, conferment of gods. Isn't this what the divine race should do? Can the human race overstep their authority? The old man laughed, humans and gods are equal, our human race can also confer gods. Yi Xian shook his head, it's a bit messy. The old man smiled, don't worry so much, in the future, you will slowly understand our world. As he spoke, he directly handed the Human King's sacred seal to Yi Xian, here, you keep it. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then said, you are so generous. Before he finished speaking, the Human King's sacred seal directly turned into a golden light and entered between his eyebrows. Boom! The sacred seal directly recognized him as its master. Yi Xian was silent. Damn it! It seemed like he was trying to force them to buy and sell. Something was wrong. There's a trap. 7017K. Chapter 2403. The Human King's seal had recognized him as its master. Needless to say, Yi Xian was caught off guard by the Human King's seal that had appeared out of nowhere. After seeing the Human King's sacred seal recognize him as its master, a meaningful smile immediately appeared on the elder's face. When Yi Xian looked at the old man's expression returned to normal. My friend, how do you feel? Yi Xian was silent. How do I feel? His intuition told him that he had been tricked. Yi Xian smiled. Sir, did you just say that if I become the queen of the human clan, I can mobilize a mysterious troop? The old man nodded. Yes. Yi Xian looked at the old man. How do I mobilize them? The old man smiled. Let's walk around and you'll know. Yi Xian was silent. The old man looked into the distance and smiled. My friend, I'll give you another benefit. As he spoke, he opened his palm and the human spirit flew into his hand. Looking at the human spirit in his hand, a complicated look flashed in the old man's eyes. He said softly, my friend, this human spirit is extremely powerful, but it is pure in nature. I hope you can treat it well. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. The human spirit in his hand transformed into a white light and entered between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Boom! Yi Xian's eyes widened. 2 white lights shot out from his eyes. In an instant, the world shook. At this moment, countless demonic beasts in this mysterious world turned to look at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's facial features suddenly became distorted. Countless images flashed in his head like a flash of lightning. These were images from the era of the myriad races. In these images, he saw other races besides the human race. However, these images were scattered. After a long time, Yi Xian's expression returned to normal. He looked at the old man. The human race. The old man nodded. It was a tragic era. Yi Xian was silent. From these images, he knew that the old man before him had died in battle. Not only this old man, but all the sages of the human race had died in battle. Other than the human race, there were other races. Yi Xian said in a low voice, What sort of calamity did you encounter all those years ago? After a moment of silence, the old man shook his head and said nothing. Yi Xian was speechless. The old man suddenly stopped and looked into the distance. In the depths of the mountain range, there were 12 statues. These 12 statues were 10,000 zhang tall, and each of them held a long spear in their hands, looking down at the world with disdain. The old man softly said, 12 battle saints. These 12 people are all warriors of the human race. In the beginning, there were 167 of them. Now, there are only 12 of them left. In order to continue protecting the human race, they have allowed themselves to sleep in the statues and await the call of the new human king. Yi Xian looked at the 12 statues. I can wake them up now, right? The old man nodded. Sure, but I don't recommend that you wake him up now. Yi Xian looked at the old man. Why? The old man smiled and said, they can be treated as one of your trump cards. Yi Xian fell silent. At this moment, the old man opened his palm and a storage ring slowly floated in front of Yi Xian. Inside this storage ring are the treasures left behind by the human race. I'll give it to you now, you can deal with it yourself. Yi Xian glanced at the storage ring. In the next moment, he hurriedly took the storage ring and said, don't worry, senior. I will definitely carry the banner of the human race. As a human, I will not shirk my responsibilities. The old man laughed, and his laughter shook the heavens. Gradually, the old man's body became illusory. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Senior, you're about to disappear completely. Can you tell me why you chose me? The old man fell silent for a moment before he said, we lost all those years ago, and we still have no chance of winning this time. So, I chose to look for external help. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. External help? The old man looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Yes. You are the external help of the human race. Yi Xian said in a low voice, I'm not that strong. The old man smiled like a sly old fox. You're not that strong, but the people behind you are. You are the king of the human race, and the people behind you are on the side of the human race. This time, the human race will rise completely. Yi Xian fell silent. It was just as he had guessed. The old man had taken a fancy to the people and forces behind him. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian said in a low voice, won't the master of Dedeabi help you? The old man shook his head. He transcends everything. Yi Xian wanted to say something else, but the old man said again, young friend, the human race is in your hands. As soon as he finished speaking, his aura became dimmer and dimmer. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he bowed slightly. Senior, you, the old man smiled. Are you reluctant? Don't be reluctant. All good things must come to an end. Yi Xian suddenly said, what I mean is, do you have anything left for me? The old man's expression froze. The next moment, he glared at Yi Xian. No. After saying that, he disappeared. Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, Dedeabi's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Congratulations. Yi Xian collected his thoughts. He looked around and said, Little Bai, do you know anything about this human era? Dedeabi said, a little. Yi Xian said in a low voice, what happened to them back then? Dedeabi fell silent. Yi Xian frowned. At this moment, Dedeabi hurriedly said, I only know the general situation of that era. I don't know the specifics. I only know that after that battle, Master intervened. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Your master intervened? Dedeabi said in a low voice, yes. If it wasn't for Master's intervention, let me tell you, all living beings in this current universe and the boundless universe would have disappeared. Yi Xian said, tell me in detail. Dedeabi sighed softly. It's not that I don't want to tell you, but I really don't know much. I only know that back then, the myriad races suffered a crushing defeat. They almost destroyed the entire current universe and the boundless universe. Xiao Ta suddenly said, "That's not right. Stupid Bai, as far as I know, your master is the source of all causes and effects. Everything that exists and has never existed is controlled by him." Dedeabi suddenly interrupted Xiao Ta. "Who told you this?" Xiao Ta said, "No one told me. I know it myself." Dedeabi said angrily, "Speak the truth." After a moment of silence, Xiao Ta said, "I heard it from Sister Tianming once." Dedeabi was silent for a long time before he sighed softly. Yi Xian suddenly said, "The source of all causes and effects. Little Bai, can you tell me in detail?" Dedeabi said in a low voice, "When you reach Senior Tianming's level, you will know what kind of existence Master belongs to. Even if I tell you now, you won't understand. As for this era of 10,000 races, I can only tell you that when something goes out of control, there is only one explanation, and that is the appearance of a super terrifying heaven-defying person, just like your sister. Only a super heaven-defying person of this level can make Master feel helpless." Hearing this, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. "You mean, there is someone who can stand shoulder to shoulder with the three swords?" Dedeabi said, "I don't know. Many times, there are some special people who may not be particularly strong, but their identities are extremely special. Even Master can't do anything to them." Yi Xian said, "For example?" Dedeabi said, "For example, you. Although your strength is as weak as a chicken, Master can't do anything to you." Yi Xian's expression froze. Dedeabi continued, "No matter what, someone who can make Master helpless must be extremely terrifying. The other party is either special like you, or they are extremely powerful. And now, you have taken up the banner of the human race, which means that your karma has been formed. As for the future, I don't know. Because I can't detect your future." Yi Xian was silent. Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Young master, don't worry. Sister Tianming is forever a god." Yi Xian, a moment later, Yi Xian collected his thoughts. He opened his palm, and the storage ring that the old man had given him appeared in his hand. There were nearly 30 billion universe veins in the storage ring. In addition, there were 100 million special spirit veins. The purity of these 100 million special spirit veins far exceeded the universe veins. Yi Xian was a little curious. "Little Bai, what kind of spirit vein is this?" Dedeabi said, "Universe vein, a very rare spirit vein. It is a spirit vein that cultivators must use in the future. It is extremely precious. You can keep it." Yi Xian nodded slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up. He, Yi Xian, was finally no longer poor. He didn't know if his current wealth could compare with Qin Guan's. The next time they met, they could compare. And in this storage ring, there were 12,000 battle armors. Yi Xian carefully looked at them. These battle armors were pure gold and extremely hard. Yi Xian tested them with the green profound sword. He found that the green profound sword could break these battle armors, but apart from the green profound sword, his normal sword qi couldn't damage these battle armors at all. These battle armors were inferior to the area battle armor, but they were the most powerful treasured armor he had seen apart from the area battle armor. If these battle armors were taken to the outside world, cultivators above the great deity realm would find it difficult to damage them. Apart from these battle armors, he found hundreds of thousands of talismans and tens of millions of ancient books. These ancient books were left behind by the humans during the era of the 10,000 tribes, and recorded the most brilliant civilization of the entire human race. These ancient books were the most precious, because there were many cultivation methods in them. He took a glance and found that these cultivation methods were far superior to the martial arts civilization that he had come into contact with. Apart from these, there were some special divine weapons. There were tens of thousands of them. Of course, these divine weapons couldn't compare to Xiao Ta and the green profound sword, but any one of them would definitely be top-notch in the outside world. Yi Xian looked at the storage ring in front of him and felt like he was dreaming. After coming to this place, he actually became the human king of the human race and inherited such a large amount of the human race's inheritance. Life. There might be surprises every day. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Little Bai, aren't there 10,000 clans? Can you tell me where the other race's legacy grounds are? I can go for a walk. I feel that it's a waste of talent for me to carry the banner of the human race with my strength. I want to carry the banner of all the races." Dedeabi. P.S. Explosion in advance. 7017K. Chapter 2404. Carry the flag. Dedeabi spoke solemnly when he heard Yi Xian. "Do you think it's for fun? Carrying the flag means responsibility, and you have to take responsibility. Do you understand?" Yi Xian smiled. "In any case, I've already carried the flag of the human race, so carrying a few more won't make any difference." Dedeabi fell silent for a moment before he said, "I don't know where the inheritances of the other races are." Yi Xian frowned slightly. Meanwhile, Dedeabi said, "Digest the inheritances of the human race first. As for the inheritances of the other races, we'll talk about it when we have the chance in the future." Yi Xian thought about it and felt that it made sense. He hadn't even fully digested the inheritances of the human race, so he was being too greedy to go after the inheritances of the other races. Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and opened his palm. The green profound sword appeared in his hand, and the human spirit had returned to the sword. Actually, if Yi Xian didn't agree, then the human spirit wouldn't be able to leave the sword at all. After all, it was Dedeabi's master who had personally fused the human spirit into the sword. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes while the sword in his hand trembled slightly. A short moment later, he suddenly slashed with it. Hiss! A ray of sword energy flew out. The ray of sword energy was surrounded by a faint golden glow. It was the faith energy of the human spirit. Hiss! That ray of sword energy instantly tore the entire world into two. At this moment, countless demon beasts in the world raised their heads and looked towards Yi Xian with fear in their eyes. The human spirit. They weren't afraid of Yi Xian, but they were afraid of the human spirit. After all, the human spirit was the faith energy left behind by generations of sages, and it wasn't something that demon beasts like them could resist. Yi Xian suddenly glanced at the surroundings and sensed numerous formidable demon beasts. Are these demon beasts from the other races, or? The human spirit said, they belong to the human clan. Back then, the human clan had tamed many powerful demon beasts. Most of these are the descendants of those powerful demon beasts. Only a few survived back then. Yi Xian blinked. So, they are also under my control, right? The human spirit said, yes. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth lifted slightly. At that moment, the human spirit continued, however, demonic beasts only respect the strong. Therefore, it's best that you don't use your status as a human emperor to order them around. Otherwise, they won't respect you. When you become stronger, they will naturally listen to your orders obediently. Yi Xian laughed and said, if I become stronger, I might not need them anymore. It's because I'm weak now that I need their help. Human spirit, Yi Xian laughed and left the human spiritual world. It had to be said that the harvest this time was extremely great. There was a huge fortune and countless divine objects. In addition, there was also a large group of super strong fighters. Right now, he was like the sun at high noon. Of course, Yi Xian still tried his best to calm himself down. Because he often couldn't stay cool for more than 3 days. He was now in the High God realm. It could be said that he was invincible in the High God realm. He also had a large group of fighters. However, coming into contact with the human race made him feel that it might not be long before a new powerful enemy appeared. Keep a low profile. To avoid being slapped in the face. After returning to the middle world, Yi Xian found that the middle world's academy had been established. The next step was to recruit students and teachers. After Envoy Zhang became the Middle World's lord, he was very concerned about Yi Xian's Guanxian Academy. Not only did he personally choose some teachers, but he also personally collected all the ancient books in the Middle World. It could be said that Envoy Zhang personally did everything to establish the Guanxian Academy. This made Qing Qiu feel much more relaxed. Somewhere in the courtyard, Yi Xian and Qing Qiu walked slowly. Envoy Zhang was behind the siblings. Qing Qiu laughed and said, "Brother, the academy has been built. However, we have a problem now. Along the way, we have built too many academies. We are currently short of manpower. Therefore, I suggest that we stop moving forward. First, we manage the academies that we have now, then we move forward." Yi Xian nodded. Okay. During this period of time, they had been advancing too quickly. They had taken over too many worlds. Not to mention others, just the large and small universes that the Middle World controlled numbered in the hundreds. The current Guanxian Academy was really short of manpower. Qing Qiu turned to look at Yi Xian and smiled. "Brother, release your human realm sword intent." Yi Xian didn't ask much. He directly released his human realm sword intent. At this moment, his human realm sword intent had become much stronger. Qing Qiu suddenly opened her hands. The green profound sword appeared in Qing Qiu's hands. After the green profound sword fell into Qing Qiu's hands, it suddenly trembled slightly, as if it was responding to something. Qing Qiu sized up the green profound sword, and then he said with a smile, "Big brother, the word human on this sword contains boundless energy of faith. Can you utilize it now?" Yi Xian nodded. "I can use it a little, but I can't use it completely." Qing Qiu smiled slightly. "This word is equivalent to the ocean. You will always have this word, which is equivalent to having the ocean behind you, and you can draw water from it infinitely. However, this isn't good enough. You should jump into the ocean and become one with it." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Become one with it?" Qing Qiu nodded. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "This word doesn't seem to be willing to recognize me as its master." This word was following him now, but it didn't really recognize him as its master. Qing Qiu said indifferently, "Let me talk to it." The human spirit suddenly said, "I don't want to talk to it. I don't want to talk to it." Qing Qiu directly ignored the human spirit, picked up the green profound sword and disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian, emissary Zhang's expression became a little strange. Not long after, Qing Qiu appeared in front of Yi Xian and emissary Zhang again. Qing Qiu suddenly removed the human word and said, "It is willing now." Yi Xian was stunned, and then said, "This," Qing Qiu smiled. "It is very easy to talk to. I said a few words to it, and it agreed." Emissary Zhang glanced at Qing Qiu, and said nothing. Yi Xian looked at the human spirit. "Are you willing to recognize me as your master?" The human spirit hesitated for a moment, and then said with a trembling voice, "I am willing." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Are you not willing?" Qing Qiu glanced at the human spirit, and the human spirit hurriedly said, "I am willing. I am willing. I will recognize you as my master now." After saying that, it turned into a beam of light and disappeared into the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Boom! As soon as the human spirit recognized Yi Xian as its master, Yi Xian's pupils suddenly shrank, and two beams of golden light burst out from his eyes. Rumble! In an instant, the whole world shook violently. At this moment, endless power of faith kept gushing out from Yi Xian's body. The powerful power of faith was like a volcanic eruption, extremely frightening. Seeing this scene, emissary Zhang was shocked. The power of faith was so strong that he had never seen it before. Qing Qiu suddenly opened his palm, and a wave of sword light suddenly enveloped Yi Xian. In an instant, Yi Xian's power of faith was directly suppressed back into Yi Xian's body. Ah! Yi Xian suddenly roared, and his face twisted. Qing Qiu suddenly said, big brother, let the power of faith fuse with your mortal sword intent. Hearing this, Yi Xian hurriedly tried. However, he noticed that the power of faith didn't fuse with his mortal sword intent at all. Qin Qiu frowned slightly when she saw this, and she was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly roared, I'm the king of humans, and I should protect the human race. If all of you have faith in me, I'll protect the human race for generations to come. The king of humans. There was no response. Qin Qiu slowly clenched his right hand, and he was about to attack. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, faith in me is equivalent to faith in my younger sister. Boom! As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, the human spirit trembled violently all of a sudden. In the next moment, the boundless power of faith directly merged with his human world sword will. Both sword wills were of the utmost benevolence. Therefore, the two did not reject each other. A sword howl suddenly shook the heavens and the earth. In an instant, Yi Xian's mortal sword intent skyrocketed, and it wasn't just skyrocketing. Moreover, it was actually slowly undergoing a qualitative change. Emissary Zhang fell silent, and he sighed with emotion in his heart. So that's how people cultivate. Alas. Emissary Zhang sighed in his heart. Comparisons are odious. Regardless of whether it's Yi Xian or Qin Qiu, cultivating is like cheating. How can honest people like me compete with them? Meanwhile, Yi Xian's mortal sword intent grew stronger and stronger. Qin Qiu watched silently from the side. As if she'd thought of something, she suddenly turned to glance at Emissary Zhang. Emissary Zhang hurriedly bowed slightly. What can I do for you, Miss Qin Qiu? Qin Qiu thought for a moment and said, you're at the second level of the godly realm now. Am I right? Emissary Zhang said respectfully, yes. Qin Qiu shook her head, my cultivation is too low, so it's not easy to get things done. As she spoke, she suddenly opened her palm, and a strand of sword energy entered the space between Emissary Zhang's brows. Bang! Emissary Zhang's body trembled violently, and countless pieces of information surged into his mind. Meanwhile, Qin Qiu took Yi Xian's spatial ring, and then she took out 3 billion universe veins and handed it to Emissary Zhang. Go to Xiao Ta and cultivate with the method I gave you. It should be easy for you to reach the Supreme God realm. Emissary Zhang knelt before Qin Qiu and said in a trembling voice, thank you, Miss Qin Qiu. What Qin Qiu gave him was a cultivation method that he'd never seen before. Qin Qiu smiled lightly, if you want to thank someone, thank my brother. You're very loyal and attentive to him, so the stronger you are, the more help you'll be to him. Emissary Zhang knelt before Yi Xian and kowtowed, thank you, young master. Needless to say, Emissary Zhang was very excited at this moment. Now, he didn't just have a cultivation method, he had money, and he had a heaven-defying cultivation place like Xiao Ta. He knew that it really couldn't be any easier for him to attain the Supreme God realm. At this moment, he suddenly understood something. It was just like how chivalry was written in novels. When you can't become the protagonist, then follow the protagonist. Yi Xian, who was cultivating, didn't respond to Emissary Zhang's gratitude. Qin Qiu grinned, go to Xiao Ta and cultivate. Emissary Zhang bowed deeply once more, and then he entered Xiao Ta. Qin Qiu gazed at Yi Xian and grinned while her eyes were filled with tenderness. Big brother, I'll grow up with you in this lifetime. 7017K. Chapter 2405. Yi Xian's sword intent grew stronger and stronger after he devoured and fused the faith energy within the human spirit. The space and the surroundings gradually seethed. Qin Qiu stood on guard silently at the side. She sat in front of Yi Xian while holding her chin in her hands, and her eyes were filled with tenderness as she gazed at Yi Xian. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes, and then 2 rays of light flashed within them. In an instant, the space before him was blasted apart by these 2 rays of light, but it didn't take long for it to return to normal. A short moment later, Yi Xian took a deep breath, and then he stood up slowly. At the instant that he stood up, the space around him instantly became illusory. Qing Qiu grinned, "Big brother, are you done?" Yi Xian opened his palm, and then a strand of golden sword intense suddenly shot into the sky. Hiss! In an instant, the heavens and the earth were torn apart. Yi Xian fell into deep thought as he gazed at the strand of sword intent that shot into the starry sky. The sword intent of the world had transformed. Presently, just a strand of sword intent was sufficient to crush a supreme expert with ease. It wasn't exaggerated at all. Moreover, his sword intent had a spirit of its own. It was that human spirit. Presently, the human spirit had become the spirit of his sword intent, and it could be said that his sword intent truly possessed its own intelligence. To a certain extent, his sword intent was even stronger than himself. Of course, the sword intent was born because of him. Without him, the sword intent was like a rootless duckweed, and it was completely meaningless. Meanwhile, Qing Qiu walked over to Yi Xian and grinned, "Congratulations, big brother." Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and spoke softly, "I haven't completely absorbed the faith energy." The faith energy. He'd forcefully devoured and fused the faith energy of the human race. So, even though his sword intent had been strengthened, he was unable to truly obtain the faith energy, and it was like killing the goose that laid the golden eggs. However, he had no other choice. Because almost all the humans that had once believed in the sages had perished now. He couldn't possibly let some dead people come back to life and worship him, could he? As though he had thought of something, Yi Xian looked at Qing Qiu. "Lass, I'm curious about something." Qing Qiu nodded. "Go ahead, brother." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "These sages are definitely very powerful. The reason why they are so powerful is because of the power of faith from the masses. If they lose the power of faith one day, doesn't that mean?" Qing Qiu nodded lightly. "You're right. They rely on the myriad of living beings in the world. Without the myriad of living beings in the world, they wouldn't have the energy of faith, and without the energy of faith, they would be equivalent to duckweed without roots. So, big brother, you can't rely too much on the energy of faith. You can use the energy of faith, but you can't treat it as everything." Yi Xian was silent. Qing Qiu smiled and said, "Don't worry. Cultivate first. When your energy of faith reaches a certain level, I'll tell you how to surpass the energy of faith." Yi Xian looked at Qing Qiu. "Lass, you seem to know a lot." Qing Qiu blinked. "Of course. I really like reading." Yi Xian laughed. He took Qing Qiu's hand and said, "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left with Qing Qiu. In the depths of the starry sky, there was a floating palace. The Xian Pavilion. The Xian Pavilion controlled hundreds of universes, and it was extremely powerful. At this moment, there were 9 people gathered in the Xian Pavilion. The leader of the group was an old man. The old man was the current pavilion master, Su Ming. Su Ming glanced at them and said, "Tell me about it." All of them fell silent. Su Ming said indifferently, "Master Yuan wants us to kill." Kill. Everyone within the hall frowned when they heard this. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man walked forward and spoke in a low voice, "How do we kill him? He possesses the bloodline of the sword master, and he's the young master of my Yang clan. How would we explain ourselves to the sword master if we kill him?" The others hurriedly nodded. They weren't idiots. Yi Xian was the young master, and his identity had been confirmed. Under such circumstances, wouldn't it be insubordination to attack Yi Xian? How would they explain themselves if they killed him? Su Ming's expression was calm. "Master Yuan wants us to kill him." Master Yuan. All of them fell silent. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man spoke abruptly, "Then why don't we let him do it himself?" The others hurriedly nodded to express their agreement. Su Ming shook his head. "I want to let him do it himself, but it's obvious that he doesn't want to do it himself. The middle-aged man spoke in a low voice, "Pavilion Master, he's clearly using us. After we kill the young master, he'll sacrifice us to appease the public." Su Ming sighed softly. "How could I not know? But we have no other choice. A higher official can crush us to death." The middle-aged man shook his head. "Pavilion Master, we can't do this." Su Ming looked at the middle-aged man. "Li Qiu, we have no other choice." The middle-aged man named Li Qiu frowned slightly. "Why not?" After a moment of silence, Su Ming said, "Because it's the first Mrs. idea." Li Qiu was astonished. Everyone in the surroundings was astounded and stunned when they heard this. Su Ming sighed in a low voice. "We have to choose sides now. Either we stand with the first miss, or we stand with young Master Yi Xian. Which side do you stand on?" Everyone was silent. Which side? If they had to choose, it would definitely be the first miss. Who didn't know that the sword master doted on the first miss? Su Ming said, "We can also play dumb, but if we do that, we will all be killed in the end." Everyone was silent. Su Ming got up and glanced at the people in the hall. "What's your choice? If you don't want to stand with the first miss, you can leave now. I won't stop you. However, once you leave this hall, you'll be withdrawing from the Xian Pavilion and the Yang clan." Withdrawing from the Xian Pavilion and the Yang clan. Everyone's face became a little gloomy. How could they be willing to withdraw from the Xian Pavilion and the Yang clan? Withdrawing from the Xian Pavilion and the Yang clan was equivalent to giving up everything they had now and the future. Without the support of the Yang clan, they would be equal to a rogue cultivator after leaving, and they would no longer get any resources. At this moment, Su Ming suddenly said, "Since no one wants to leave, it means that you've made your choice." With that, his eyes gradually became cold. "Get ready to kill with one blow." In the hall, everyone's expression gradually became solemn. After the meeting, Li Qiu quietly left the Xian Pavilion. He decided to withdraw. Naturally, he would not say that just now. Wasn't it courting death to say that in front of so many people? There were two reasons why he chose to withdraw. First, Yi Xian had the crazy demon bloodline. A young master who had awakened the crazy demon bloodline, even if he was an illegitimate child, was definitely recognized by the sword master. He was not someone that they, as subordinates, could touch. Second, if the first miss really wanted to kill Yi Xian, why didn't the other party directly send a super strong master? Instead, they wanted to kill him? In his opinion, there was something very wrong with this matter. Many times, you could get everything by taking a gamble, but it was also possible that you would get nothing. In life, one had to be cautious. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Li Qiu. The person who came was Su Ming. Seeing Su Ming, Li Qiu's face suddenly sank. Su Ming looked at Li Qiu. "Do you want to send a message?" After a moment of silence, Li Qiu said, "Pavilion Master, don't you think this matter is strange?" "This matter?" Su Ming shook his head. "If the first miss's plan is ruined because of you, everyone in the Xian Pavilion will die. So, have a safe journey." After that, he disappeared directly. At the same time, several terrifying and powerful auras appeared around him. Seeing this scene, Li Qiu's pupils suddenly shrank. In the middle world, somewhere in the courtyard, Yi Xian was lying on a chair, holding an ancient book in his hand. Next to Yi Xian was Lan Qing, the president of the Immortal Treasure Pavilion branch. Because Lan Qing had taken the initiative to lend him 3 billion, Lan Qing now received the most benefits. Now Lan Qing was in charge of the entire medium world, and his power could be said to be the greatest among all the branch presidents. Yi Xian suddenly put down the ancient book in his hand, then smiled and said, "Is there any movement in the Xian Pavilion?" Lan Qing said in a deep voice, "Young master, I came here today for this matter. According to my spy, the Xian Pavilion may have a big move soon." Yi Xian looked at Lan Qing. A big move against me? Lan Qing nodded. Yi Xian chuckled. Lan Qing hesitated, then said, Young Master Yi, aren't you worried? Yi Xian smiled and said, What am I worried about? Lan Qing said in a deep voice, Why do they dare to do this? My intuition tells me that this is very abnormal. Yi Xian smiled slightly. You want to say that this may be my sister's idea? Lan Qing hesitated, then nodded. Yi Xian shook his head. It's not my sister's idea. Lan Qing frowned slightly. Why? Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. My sister and I have been through life and death together. If she really wanted to be the Yang clan's patriarch, she didn't need to kill me at all. She just needed to say a word and I would let her be. Secondly, my father is still alive. Even if my sister had 100 guts, she wouldn't dare to do such a thing like killing her own brother. Speaking up to here, the corner of his mouth slightly raised, and the most important reason is that my sister knows of my sister's existence. Ha. Qing. He could feel that his sister was still very afraid of Qing. Kill him? His sister would trick him, but she absolutely wouldn't dare to kill him. Thinking of this, Yi Xian couldn't help but shake his head and smile. What is this? A group of self-righteous guys, presumptuously guessing my sister's thoughts. Lan Qing said in a deep voice, But young master, it can't go on like this. You have to contact the Yang clan's headquarters, otherwise, they will keep coming to you for trouble. This, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. No need. Lan Qing was a little puzzled. Why? Yi Xian smiled slightly. The clouds and the wind were light. I have nothing to fear. At this time, Xiao Ta suddenly said, Young master, the real reason is that you don't know where the Yang clan's headquarters is. Yi Xian. 7017K. Chapter 2406. Yang clan headquarters? Yi Xian was speechless. He really didn't know. Of course, he didn't really care about it now. He really didn't care about the Yang clan. Without his father, the Yang clan wasn't that strong. He wanted to be like his father, Qing, and his elder brother. One person was strong, and the whole clan was invincible. Lan Qing suddenly said, Young Master Yi, do you need to contact the pavilion master? Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and shook his head with a smile. No need. If he wanted to fight now, as long as he awakened the 12 battle sages in the human spiritual world, the ordinary powerhouses of the Yang clan would definitely not be his opponent. In addition, his current strength was also very heaven-defying. He didn't care about the trivial outer powerhouses of the Yang clan. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Lan Qing nodded slightly and said nothing. At this moment, Envoy Zhang suddenly appeared. When he saw Envoy Zhang, Lan Qing's pupils suddenly shrank. Zhang. Brother Zhang, you. Supreme God? Envoy Zhang said excitedly, Yes. Lan Qing felt as if he was struck by lightning. How long has it been? Lan Qing felt a little doubtful about life. At this moment, Envoy Zhang suddenly bowed deeply to Yi Xian, Young Master. His expression was extremely respectful. He knew that the reason why he could reach the next level and directly reach Supreme God was all because of this man in front of him. Yi Xian smiled slightly. How do you feel? Envoy Zhang smiled. Very good. Yi Xian laughed. Don't be satisfied with this. In the future, I will need you to help me more, do you understand? Hearing this, Envoy Zhang suddenly became excited. This subordinate will die 10,000 times. Yi Xian nodded. Go do what you need to do. Envoy Zhang bowed deeply and then retreated. Yi Xian looked at Lan Qing, continued to pay attention to the Xian pavilion. Lan Qing hurriedly said, Yes. With that, he also retreated. Yi Xian chuckled, picked up the ancient book and continued to read. He had been thinking about one thing, which was the internal affairs of the Yang clan. When a clan was strong to a certain extent, the people below would more or less become arrogant and then lose themselves. There was no doubt that the same problem had arisen within the Yang family. It should be said that the internal problems of the Yang clan were not small. Thinking of this, Yi Xian sighed softly. It seemed that he had to reorganize the Yang clan. Right at this moment, Qing Qiu appeared beside Yi Xian. She smiled and said, "Brother, this place has basically stabilized. I'm going to take a look at other places. Otherwise, I won't be at ease." Yi Xian thinks for a moment, then takes out the green profound sword and passes it to Qing Qiu. "This sword is fast, take it." Qing Qiu blinked. "I don't need it." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why?" Qing Qiu giggled. "It's not difficult to travel through time and space without any obstruction." With that, she disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian remained silent for a moment before he said, "Why am I like trash in front of these girls? Was it an illusion?" Xiao Ta suddenly said, "It's not an illusion." Yi Xian, the Daobi also said, "Young Master Yi, after following you for so long, I found a good point about you." Yi Xian was curious. "What good point?" The Daobi said, "You know your place." Yi Xian's face instantly darkened. This broken tower and broken pen are getting more and more arrogant recently. At this moment, Emissary Zhang suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Emissary Zhang said in a low voice, "Young master." Yi Xian did not answer. Instead, he raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. He frowned. "Are the people from the Xian pavilion here?" Emissary Zhang nodded. "Yes." Xian pavilion. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed. Murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Had this group of people gone mad? Are they really going to target me? Where are their brains? Are they brainless? At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in the sky. When this old man appeared in the sky, an invisible pressure instantly enveloped the entire middle world. The godly realm. Moreover, it wasn't an ordinary godly realm expert. Meanwhile, Lan Qing appeared by Yi Xian's side, and he spoke in a low voice, "Young Master Yi, he's the pavilion master of the Xian pavilion, Su Ming. He's probably at the peak of the godly realm." As he spoke, he glanced into the distance and continued, "But this time, they've sent at least 12 godly realm experts, 12 supreme gods." Emissary Zhang's face instantly fell when he heard this. Presently, he was the only supreme god on their side. Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of Su Ming, and Su Ming's face remained expressionless when he saw Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled, "Pavilion Master Su, do you want to have a chat?" Su Ming spoke calmly, "May I know what you want to talk about?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "Did my older sister tell all of you that she wanted to kill me?" Su Ming gazed at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian smiled, "Actually, I truly think that you can ask the higher-ups and find out if my older sister really wants to kill me. What do you think?" Su Ming fell silent for a short moment before he said, "The higher-ups intend to kill you." Yi Xian frowned slightly, "Who's that?" Su Ming's expression was calm, "Master Yuan." Yi Xian said, "What rank is he in the Yang clan?" Su Ming fell silent. He really didn't know what rank Master Yuan was in the Yang clan. All he knew was that Master Yuan was his superior. Besides that, he didn't know much about Master Yuan. Yi Xian sighed softly, "Since you were able to become the pavilion master and manage an area, your intelligence is definitely not low. Let me ask you, if my older sister really wants to kill me, then why didn't she just send someone stronger? Why did she send all of you instead?" Su Ming shook his head, "The higher-ups intend to kill you." Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, "Actually, you're not sure if it's my older sister's intention, right?" Su Ming fell silent. Of course he wasn't sure. As far as he was concerned, Master Yuan probably couldn't come into contact with Yang Nianxue, so he was suspicious of what Master Yuan said. Su Ming sighed softly, "Young master, I'm curious about something, and I hope you can explain it." Yi Xian nodded, "Speak." Su Ming looked straight at Yi Xian. They said that you're an illegitimate child, is that true? Yi Xian smiled. What do you think? Su Ming fell silent for a moment before he said, if you're not an illegitimate child, then why is your surname Yi and not Yang? Yi Xian's face instantly darkened. Su Ming continued, I hope young master can explain it. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he smiled. Do you know your sword master well? Su Ming shook his head. I don't know much. Yi Xian smiled. Then do you know your sword master's past? Su Ming frowned slightly. A moment later, his pupils dilated. Release. Raise. Then, under everyone's gaze, he suddenly knelt down and said with a trembling voice, your subordinate, Pavilion Leader Su Ming of Xian Pavilion, greets young master. Behind him, the group of experts hesitated for a moment before they knelt down one after another. Raised. Su Ming wished he could slap himself to death. He didn't know much about the green-robed sword master, but he knew one thing, and that was that the green-robed sword master had been left to fend for himself. This was because the Yang clan had records of the green-robed sword master's past. Obviously, Yi Xian was also raised freely. Why was he raised freely? In other words, he was being nurtured. Thinking of this, Su Ming's body trembled even more. Yi Xian looked at Su Ming, who was kneeling in front of him, and didn't speak. Seeing that Yi Xian didn't speak, Su Ming hurriedly said, please forgive me, young master. Yi Xian smiled. Get up. Su Ming didn't dare to get up. Yi Xian smiled. Get up. I don't blame you. Su Ming hesitated for a moment before he slowly got up. Yi Xian smiled. How do I contact Master Yuan? Su Ming hurriedly said, I'll do it. After he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and a token in his hand soared into the sky, straight into the depths of the horizon. Yi Xian looked deep into the sky. Soon, the space there started to tremble. Soon, a shadow showed up there. Master Yuan. Yi Xian looked at Master Yuan and smiled. You're the one who said my sister wants to kill me? Master Yuan paid no attention to Yi Xian, and he gazed at Su Ming instead. This is your decision? Su Ming spoke in a low voice. Master Yuan, I firmly believe that the eldest young miss wouldn't do something so heartless. Master Yuan chuckled. How interesting. A tiny pavilion master actually dared to rebel. Who gave you the courage to do that? As soon as he finished speaking, a strand of terrifying pressure swept down from the sky. The expressions of everyone in the surroundings instantly changed when this terrifying pressure appeared. Because merely this pressure was probably sufficient to destroy Middle-World City. Meanwhile, emissary Zhang obstructed Yi Xian's path and was about to attack. However, Yi Xian suddenly flicked his sleeve, and a ray of light shot into the sky. Bang! The ray of sword light forcefully blocked the terrifying pressure, but it did not shatter it. Yi Xian frowned slightly when he witnessed this scene, and then he suddenly opened his palm and a strand of sword intent shot into the sky. Bang! In an instant, the terrifying pressure in the sky was instantly slashed into pieces and vanished without a trace. Su Ming's expression instantly changed when he witnessed this scene. At this moment, he was shocked. He hadn't imagined that Yi Xian's strength would actually be so formidable. Obviously, it was just as he'd guessed. Yi Xian had really been left to fend for himself. How could an illegitimate child possess such terrifying strength at such a young age? In the sky, when Yuan Shi saw Yi Xian's sword intent, he frowned slightly. Your sword intent? Yi Xian gazed at Master Yuan, and he didn't waste his breath at all. He suddenly charged into the sky with his sword in hand. Master Yuan frowned slightly, and then he suddenly slapped his palm down. Bang! An enormous palm swept down from the sky, and the powerful force it carried crushed everything in the world. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword arrived before him. Rumble. A world-shaking explosion suddenly resounded in the sky, and then an expanse of light erupted. Yi Xian returned to where he stood earlier, and he was just about to attack again. However, Master Yuan suddenly slapped his palm towards the right. Bang! The space on the right shattered into pieces, and then a spatial passageway appeared. In the next moment, numerous terrifying auras swept out from within the spatial passageway. Emissary Zhang's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene. Young master, many terrifying experts are rushing over here. 7017K. Chapter 2407. What a terrifying expert. Yi Xian frowned when he heard that. An expert from the Yang clan? Damn it, is the Yang clan crazy? Could it be that they were all pigs with human heads? I'm the young master of the Yang clan. Moreover, I'm a real young master. Even if I'm a bastard, I'm not someone that these subordinates can kill. Do these people not use their brains? The auras in the teleportation formation grew more and more terrifying. Meanwhile, Su Ming suddenly said, "Protect the young master." As soon as he finished speaking, he and the experts beside him came to stand by Yi Xian's side. He had chosen to side with Yi Xian because he was sure that Yi Xian was not a bastard and was not a bastard. Even if he was a bastard, he was a bastard who had awakened the insanity demon bloodline. Of course, he had no other choice. He could only choose Yi Xian and follow Yi Xian to the end. In the sky, Master Yuan looked down at Yi Xian with an ice-cold expression. Ha! At this moment, a burst of laughter came from the teleportation formation next to Yuan Shi. In the next moment, a middle-aged man charged out. Rumble. As soon as the middle-aged man charged out, a terrifying aura swept down from the sky as if it was going to crush the heavens and the earth. Below, Yi Xian's expression was calm. He opened his palm and a sword intent shot into the sky. Boom! That terrifyingly powerful pressure was instantly crushed by this sword intent. The middle-aged man who had just charged out frowned slightly when he saw this, and a wisp of surprise flashed in his eyes. Interesting. Meanwhile, 12 people appeared behind the middle-aged man. All 12 of them were at the invincible god realm. Next to Yi Xian, Su Ming said, "Young master, these 12 people are not from the Yang clan." Not from the Yang clan. Yi Xian looked at Yuan Shi and chuckled, "Looks like he's gotten help." Outside help. Yuan Shi was silent. He had indeed found external help because he didn't dare to let the masters of the Yang clan kill Yi Xian. Those top masters were not easy to fool. Once they saw Yi Xian, not only would they not kill him, they might even help Yi Xian. Therefore, he could only look for external help and let outsiders kill Yi Xian. The middle-aged man beside Master Yuan sized up Yi Xian and smiled, "You're the illegitimate son of the Yang clan?" Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man smiled, "Do you know who I am?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't know." The middle-aged man laughed. "I'm from the ancient Yong sect. Have you heard of me?" Ancient Yong sect. Yi Xian turned to look at Su Ming. Su Ming said in a low voice, "It's an ancient sect that specializes in killing people and robbing them. They're like mercenaries." Mercenaries. Yi Xian frowned, and he gazed at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man suddenly laughed ferociously. "Killing you is a huge business deal." You. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss. The space in front of Yi Xian split apart. In an instant, Yi Xian appeared in the universe. In the next moment, 4 afterimages appeared around the middle-aged man. Instant of invincibility. At the instant that Yi Xian executed this attack, the middle-aged man's pupils constricted. You. He didn't have the time to waste his breath. He suddenly flipped his right hand and slapped it down. Bang! A strand of energy that could obliterate the world suddenly erupted with him at the center. Hiss. 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 4 rays of light suddenly crisscrossed and slashed around the middle-aged man. Everyone watched as the middle-aged man was slashed into pieces. An instant kill. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Yuan Shi's eyes were filled with disbelief when he witnessed this scene. Needless to say, he was truly stunned at this moment. He'd been instantly killed. That middle-aged man was on the same level as him, but he'd been instantly killed with a single attack. At this moment, all the other experts from the ancient Yong sect were dumbstruck. Instantly killed with a single attack. On the other hand, everyone on Yi Xian's side was extremely excited. Especially Su Ming. At this moment, he was truly excited. He hadn't imagined that Yi Xian's strength would actually be so formidable. At the same time, he felt quite fortunate that he'd surrendered quickly. Otherwise, not even his corpse would remain by now. Meanwhile, Yi Xian raised his head to look at Yuan Shi, and he chuckled, "That's it?" Yuan Shi stared at Yi Xian. In the next moment, Yi Xian suddenly became ethereal. He intended to flee. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He opened his palm, and then the green profound sword in his hand shot into the sky. Hiss! A ray of light tore through the sky and slashed straight at Yuan Shi. However, when Yi Xian's sword arrived in front of Yuan Shi, he'd vanished. He'd fled. Yi Xian instantly frowned when he saw this scene. If an expert of such a level wanted to flee, then he was unable to do anything. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian turned around to look at the experts from the ancient Yong sect, and their expressions instantly changed when they saw Yi Xian look over. Yi Xian's face was emotionless. Kill! Kill! As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, Su Ming led all the experts behind him into the sky. In next to no time, the battle had begun. After their big brother was killed by Yi Xian, the morale of the experts from the ancient Yong sect had fallen to rock bottom. At this moment, they didn't have the will to continue fighting. Thus, they were crushed by Su Ming and the others as soon as the battle began. It wasn't long before all the experts from the ancient Yong sect were annihilated. Su Ming arrived before Yi Xian and said respectfully, "Young master." Yi Xian said calmly, "Where's that Yuan Shi?" Su Ming was shocked in his heart, and he hurriedly said, "He's in Ash Cloud Mountain region." Yi Xian nodded. "Lead the way." Su Ming laughed bitterly. "Young master, I don't know where this Ash Cloud Mountain region is." Yi Xian looked at Su Ming, and the latter hurriedly said, "I really don't know." Yi Xian turned around to look at Lan Qing. "Investigate." Lan Qing bowed respectfully. "Understood." As soon as he finished speaking, he left silently. On the battlefield, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Ash Cloud Mountain region. This time, he decided to deal with them in one go. Yi Xian chuckled lightly. "It's time to head to the Yang clan's headquarters." Emissary Zhang instantly became excited when he heard this. To the Yang clan's headquarters. This was something he dreamt of even in his dreams. Su Ming glanced at Yi Xian, and he was delighted in his heart as well. If I follow Yi Xian back to the Yang clan, then what would that be like? That would be like a trusted aide. When he thought up to here, Su Ming instantly grinned like a chrysanthemum. It wasn't long before Lan Qing appeared once more, and he bowed deeply. "Young Master Yi, I've found the address." "It's quite far." Yi Xian smiled. "It's fine. Let's go." Lan Qing nodded slightly, and then he clapped his hands. In next to no time, an enormous eternity warship tore through the sky and descended firmly in front of Yi Xian and the others. Lan Qing said respectfully, "Young Master Yi, this is an eternity warship. It can travel through the space of countless galaxies. Take this." Yi Xian nodded. He'd never been to Ash Cloud Mountain region, so he was unable to use the green profound sword to travel there directly. After all of them ascended the eternity warship, Yi Xian turned around to look at Emissary Zhang. Emissary Zhang hesitated for a moment before he said, "Young master, the middle world needs people right now. I'll stay here." Even though he wanted to follow Yi Xian, Qing Qiu wasn't in the middle world right now. So, he could only choose to stay. A qualified subordinate had to share the worries of his superior. Yi Xian smiled slightly. No need. Just follow me. Emissary Zhang was overjoyed when he heard this, and he said excitedly, understood. Even though he could become a universe god and dominate a region by staying in the middle world, he still wanted to follow Yi Xian to the Yang clan. Only by following Yi Xian could he have a sea of stars. After a short while, the Eternity Warship started up, and it transformed into an afterimage that vanished into the distant starry sky. Universe of Gods. Qing Qiu returned to the headquarters of Guanchuan Academy. Even though there were many branches in Guanchuan Academy now, the headquarters was the Guanchuan Academy in the Universe of Gods. Qing Qiu went straight to Xu Xian. Xu Xian was the head of Guanchuan Academy's literature faculty, and his authority was only inferior to Qing Qiu and Yi Xian. However, he was obsessed with literature and didn't care about this at all. Qing Qiu smiled slightly. Master. Master. Qing Qiu had always respected Xu Xian. Even now, she still respected this old man in front of her. Xu Xian smiled. Girl, now you, saying this, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. He wasn't stupid. How could he not see the change in Qing Qiu? It could be said that she had become a different person. Qing Qiu smiled slightly. I will always be Master's disciple. Xu Xian's heart warmed, and he smiled lightly. Let's get down to business. Qing Qiu nodded. Now that the academy is getting bigger and bigger, and there are many branches, I don't have enough manpower. I want to transfer some people from the headquarters to the branches, and let them help to manage the literature faculty. Xu Xian nodded slightly. Sure. There are many people who can use them. Qing Qiu smiled. Good. Xu Xian suddenly said. How is young master now? Qing Qiu smiled. Very good. No one can hurt him. Xu Xian hesitated for a while, and then he said. Now that the academy is getting bigger and bigger, I'm really worried that the original intention of the academy will change. Sigh. Qing Qiu nodded. I know that, master. Don't worry, as long as I'm here, the academy will never change. Xu Xian glanced at Qing Qiu, and sighed in a low voice. Girl, I can't see through you anymore. Qing Qiu smiled. Really? Xu Xian nodded. But I know you are still the same Qing Qiu. Qing Qiu nodded. I am in front of master. You are in front of master. Xu Xian shook his head with a smile. After chatting for a while, Qing Qiu left the hall. When she was about to leave, she suddenly turned around and saw a woman walking slowly not far away. The woman looked very young, less than 20 years old, and she was holding an ancient book. As if sensing something, the woman turned to look at Qing Qiu. When she saw Qing Qiu, the woman smiled. Miss Qing Qiu, nice to meet you. Qing Qiu smiled and asked, What's your name? The woman combed the hair that was fluttering behind her ear, and then she said, Gu Ran. 7017K. Chapter 2408. Gu Ran. Qing Qiu sized Gu Ran up, grinned, and then turned around and left. Gu Ran suddenly said, How is the dean? Qing Qiu stopped and turned to look at Gu Ran with a smile, Very good. Gu Ran nodded thoughtfully. Qing Qiu smiled and said, Good luck. Then, she turned and disappeared at the end of the horizon. Gu Ran looked at the horizon with eyes full of envy. She envied that Qing Qiu could always stay by Yi Xian's side. After a long time, the envy in Gu Ran's eyes turned into determination. Only when she was strong enough could she pursue the man she wanted. After a while, Gu Ran turned and left. Tsangyin Mountain. After Yuan Shi returned to Tsangyin Mountain, he immediately went to Tsang Hall to see Yun Song, the king of Tsangyin Mountain. Only Yuan Shi and Yun Song were in the hall. After a long time, Yun-sung put down a secret report in his hand and looked at Yuan Shi. You want to live? Yuan Shi nodded. He knew he was in big trouble. Yi Xian might not be a bastard child, but a young master who was left to his own devices. Killing a young master who was left to his own devices, and the young family's young master at that. Yuan Shi didn't dare to think about it. Yun-sung's expression was calm. Go to the judicial division. Hearing this, Yuan Shi's pupils shrank, and he said with a trembling voice, King. Yun-sung shook his head. If you run, you won't have a chance to go to the judicial division to accept your punishment. Yuan Shi smiled bitterly. King, if I go to the judicial division, will I be able to live? Yun-sung said calmly, if you go to the headquarters, you won't be able to live. Yuan Shi frowned. Go to the branch? Yun-sung nodded. The branch of the punishment department is thousands of li away from here. I've already talked to the manager. Once you go there, he'll decide on your punishment and spare you from death. Once the punishment department decides on your punishment, even the young master has no right to interfere. If he interferes, it'll be the same as questioning the punishment department. At that time, it'll be a conflict between him and the punishment department. Hearing this, Yuan Shi became excited. The Judicial Division. This was an independent organization of the Yang clan, and it only listened to two people. One was the green-robed man, the sword master, and the other was the matriarch, Su Qingshi. Other than these two, the Judicial Division didn't need to listen to anyone else's orders. Yuan Shi understood the World King's meaning. If Yi Xian insisted on killing him, then that was the same as targeting the Punishment Division, and targeting the Punishment Division was the same as having a conflict with Matriarch Su Qingshi. Thinking of this, the corners of Yuan Shi's mouth lifted slightly. Yun-sung said softly, if we can't resolve the conflict, then we'll shift the conflict and make it escalate. Master Yuan bowed deeply. This subordinate admires you. Yun-sung said calmly, he will be here soon. You should leave. Master Yuan bowed once more before leaving quietly. Yun-sung picked up a secret document in front of him. After reading it for a long time, his expression gradually turned solemn. Suddenly, Yun-sung put down the secret memorial and said, Welcome, young master. His voice spread out like thunder. In the distance, a group of people appeared in the azure cloud mountain world. It was Yi Xian and the others. As soon as Yi Xian appeared in the lead, countless powerful divine senses locked onto him. Yi Xian's face was expressionless. He flicked his sleeve, and a strand of sword intent slashed out. In an instant, all the divine senses in the surroundings were slashed apart. At this moment, Yun-sung appeared in front of Yi Xian. He bowed slightly. Greetings, young lord. I'm Yun-sung, king of the Zhangyin mountain realm. Yi Xian looked at Yun-sung. Where's Yuan Shi? Yun-sung grinned. Young master, this person has committed a crime, and he surrendered himself to the punishment division. Yi Xian looked at Yun-sung and didn't speak. After a short while, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. I'll give you a chance. Bring him to see me in the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. Yun-sung spoke solemnly, Young master, he's in the punishment division. I have no right to interfere with it. Yi Xian opened his palm. In the next moment, the green profound sword suddenly trembled violently, and then Yi Xian instantly appeared in space. Yun-sung's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene. Activate the formation. Bang! In an instant, almost 1,000,000 beams of light shot into the sky from Azure Cloud City, and then they converged into Yun-sung like a river. At the same time, Yun-sung suddenly clenched his right fist, and then countless strands of faith energy instantly converged into his right arm. Yun-sung roared furiously as he smashed his fist forward. This punch caused the entire blue cloud mountain world to tremble, and then it cracked. The entire universe cracked apart. Meanwhile, 4 afterimages suddenly appeared around Yun-sung, and then 4 rays of light crisscrossed around him. Hiss! 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 In an instant, countless rays of white light were obliterated. Meanwhile, Yi Xian returned to where he stood earlier and sheathed his sword. Crack. Suddenly, the sound of something cracking resounded, and then Yun Song's body shattered into pieces. However, his soul was still there. A golden bell floated above his soul, and it was exactly this golden bell and the grand formation from before that had protected his soul. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. Yun Song was a terrifying expert above the high god realm, and he was a world king. Yet this young master had destroyed his body with a single strike of his sword. Moreover, it was under the circumstances that Yun Song had activated the grand formation. It was too terrifying. Yun Song gazed at Yi Xian, and he was just about to speak when Yi Xian's sword suddenly vanished. Yun Song's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene, and then he clenched his right fist and smashed it forward. A strand of terrifying energy of the soul swept out. Even though Yun Song's body was gone, his strength was still terrifying. However, his pupils constricted when his fist came into contact with Yi Xian's green profound sword. He wanted to stop, but it was too late. Hiss. Yi Xian's green profound sword pierced the center of Yun Song's forehead. Bang! Everyone watched as the green profound sword nailed Yun Song's soul to the spot. Deathly silence filled the surroundings. Gone. Right at this moment, a group of experts appeared around Yun Song, and they gazed vigilantly at Yi Xian. Yun Song's eyes were filled with disbelief as he gazed at Yi Xian. What sword technique is that? Yi Xian gazed at Yun Song. Was it Master Yuan's idea to kill me, or was it yours? Yun Song stared fixedly at Yi Xian in silence. Yi Xian chuckled. I'm so stupid. Master Yuan is clearly your subordinate. How would he dare to do it without your permission? As soon as he finished speaking, he clenched his right fist. The green profound sword trembled violently. Bang! Yun Song's soul was directly absorbed by the green profound sword. His soul was obliterated. Su Ming, who stood behind Yi Xian, broke out in a cold sweat when he witnessed this scene. Damn it! This young master was simply too abnormal. I actually dared to kill him in the past. Meanwhile, one of the old men from Yun Song's group spoke furiously, Young master, even if the world king has made a mistake, you have no right to kill him. You should hand him over to the punishment division. You. Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at the old man. I won't. The old man was astounded. You. Yi Xian glanced at the experts in the surroundings, and then he said, I suppose all of you have a part in trying to kill me. As he spoke, the green profound sword in his grasp suddenly started trembling violently. The old man's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he hurriedly said, Young master, I had no part in it. It was the world king's decision. Yi Xian remained expressionless and didn't speak a word. Meanwhile, emissary Zhang spoke furiously, Then why aren't you kneeling down? Kneeling? The old man was stunned, and then he hurriedly knelt down. The experts behind him knelt down as well. All of them submitted. Yi Xian glanced at them, and then he turned to look at emissary Zhang. From this moment onward, you're the world king of this world, and you're in full control of this world. Emissary Zhang was stunned for a moment, and then he hurriedly said, Yes. Yi Xian suddenly said, How do I get to the punishment division? The old man who stood before Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, It's 500,000 kilometers to the north. Yi Xian nodded, to the punishment division. The old man hurriedly said, Young master, I have something to say. I wonder if you're willing to listen. Yi Xian smiled, Go ahead. The old man spoke solemnly, Young master, the punishment division is a special organization, and it's independent from the various departments. Moreover, they only listen to Madame Su and the sword master. Even the eldest young miss doesn't have the right to interfere with the punishment division. So, if you head to the punishment division, then you might enter into conflict with them. Once that happens. He didn't continue at this point. Yi Xian grinned. You're afraid that I'll enter into conflict with Auntie Su? The old man nodded. Madame Su. She was like a god in the Yang clan, and it could be said that Madame Su's status in the Yang clan far surpassed the sword master. Moreover, the entire Yang clan could be said to have been founded by Madame Su, and that was why so many people had chosen to support Yang Nianxue. If Yi Xian entered into conflict with the punishment division, then it would be equivalent to entering into conflict with Madame Su. Yi Xian suddenly chuckled. I definitely respect Auntie Su, and I believe that she didn't order her subordinates to target me. But, as he spoke, he shook his head and smiled. I have no intention of targeting anyone. All I know is that I will definitely kill those who want me dead. No one can save them. The old man smiled bitterly. Yi Xian smiled, and then he turned around and vanished into the depths of the starry sky. Emissary Zhang hurriedly followed him when he saw this. He didn't care who Yi Xian was going against, all he knew was that he had to follow Yi Xian closely. Su Ming hesitated for a moment when he saw Emissary Zhang follow them, and then he gritted his teeth and followed them immediately. In any case, there was no way out. Only by following Yi Xian could they have a future. The old man hesitated. At this moment, someone suddenly said, Old Gu, should we go with them? After a moment of silence, Old Gu shook his head. No. The man said solemnly, now is the best time for us to show our loyalty. If we lose this opportunity, Old Gu said in a deep voice, this young master is too unyielding. He doesn't know how to endure. If he goes against Mistress Su like this, he won't have a good time. As he spoke, he looked towards the horizon and said softly, this young master has overlooked something. He's the young master of the Yang clan, and the Yang clan belongs to Matriarch Su. It can be said that with a single word from Matriarch Su, he'll instantly lose his identity as the young master. And without this identity, what does he count as? With that, he shook his head. Nothing. 7017K. Chapter 2409. Nothing at all. The person next to the old man was silent. Yi Xian was indeed a genius, and he was extremely powerful. However, if not for the fact that he was the Yang clan's young prince, Yi Xian would be nothing in front of the entire Yang clan. As Old Gu had said, nothing at all. Old Gu sighed again. I suggested to him just now to see if the young lord could see the big picture. Unfortunately, he shook his head. He's just a hot-blooded young man who only knows how to be brave. Sigh. His eyes flashed with disappointment. Let's wait and see. He will get himself into trouble at the punishment department. He will lose his identity as the young lord and might even be expelled from the Yang clan. Deep in the starry sky, Su Ming hesitated for a while and said, Young lord, the punishment department is not simple. Yi Xian said with a smile, how so? Su Ming said in a deep voice, they are in charge of the Yang clan's punishment department and are independent of all departments. They only listen to Mistress Su's orders. They might not give you face. Yi Xian blinked. I don't need them to give me face. Su Ming was silent. At this moment, he suddenly felt a little panicky. What was the young lord trying to do? Was he going to destroy the Yang clan? Thinking of this, Su Ming broke out in a cold sweat. To be honest, he wanted to run away because he realized that the young lord was going to destroy everything. Emissary Zhang stood respectfully next to Yi Xian. He was not panicking at all. Anyway, he had already bet everything he had on Yi Xian. He would either live a life of luxury and wealth or die and vanish from the world. He had no regrets. This was his choice. Not long after, Yi Xian and the rest arrived at the punishment department. The punishment department was located on a tall mountain. The entire place was eerie like a ghost palace. One look at it was terrifying. Su Ming's face turned solemn when he saw the punishment department. In fact, he had only heard of the punishment department. He had never come into contact with it because his rank was too low. In the entire Yang clan, the judicial department was extremely mysterious. It could be said that they were the secret guards of the Son of Heaven, and had the terrifying power to act first and report later. Yi Xian looked down at the judicial division and smiled. He opened his palm and a beam of sword light shot into the sky. Buzz! A sword cry shook the heavens and earth. However, there was no reaction from the punishment division below. At the sight of this, Emissary Zhang's face darkened. Young master, let's do it. The judicial department definitely knew about the arrival of Yi Xian and the others, but they didn't react at all. There was only one explanation, and that was to give Yi Xian a show of strength. Young master. The judicial division only answers to Mistress Su. Upon hearing Emissary Zhang's words, Yi Xian laughed heartily. In the next moment, he opened his palm and the Qingxian sword appeared in his hand. He looked at the judicial division below and said, I, Yi Xian, am not an unreasonable person. I have no enmity with the judicial division, so I really do not wish to kill. Today, I'm only here to kill Master Yuan alone. There was still no response from the judicial division. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up into a sinister smile. In the next moment, his eyes instantly turned blood red. In an instant, a terrifying bloodline power shot into the sky. In an instant, the entire starry sky was like a sea of blood. It was extremely terrifying. The demonic madness bloodline. The expressions of Su Ming and the others changed drastically. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. In front of them, the old man looked at Yi Xian with a trace of solemnity in his eyes. The demonic madness bloodline, Yi Xian suddenly burst into laughter. Cut the crap. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss. Under everyone's gazes, the old man's pupils suddenly shrank. Before he could react, his head flew out with a pillar of blood. Without wasting any time, Yi Xian directly charged towards the judicial division below. At the same time, a monstrous murderous intent and vicious aura enveloped the entire judicial division. Under the shroud of the murderous intent and vicious aura, the expressions of the experts in the judicial division changed drastically. In front of Yi Xian, the old man quickly said, Young master, the judicial division is independent from all other departments. We only listen to the sword master and Mistress Su. You. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. This time, he did not use instant of invincibility. Instead, he directly activated all his sword intent. After merging with the power of faith of the human spirit, his human world sword intent had reached an extremely terrifying level. However, he had never tested its power. At this moment, he unleashed his human world sword intent to the extreme. With the enhancement of the power of the bloodline, his human world sword intent had become even more terrifying. At the moment Yi Xian attacked with his sword, the old man was instantly shocked. In the face of Yi Xian's terrifying attack, he did not dare to underestimate or be careless at all, nor did he dodge. Because Yi Xian's sword was too fast, and he could not dodge at all. The old man suddenly charged forward. As he charged, countless afterimages overlapped with each other. At the same time, the space and the surroundings directly shattered. Hiss. A ray of black light directly collided with Yi Xian's terrifying attack. Bang! Suddenly, a ray of sword light shattered, and countless afterimages were destroyed. At the same time, the old man directly retreated explosively for tens of thousands of meters. As soon as he stopped, an afterimage suddenly appeared behind him. The afterimage was Yi Xian, and a sword had suddenly stabbed into the old man's forehead. That sword was the green profound sword. It was an instant kill. At the sight of this, Emissary Zhang was extremely shocked. He realized that Yi Xian's strength had become stronger again. How ridiculous. Su Ming's expression was extremely solemn as well. Yi Xian's strength was truly terrifying. That old man was at the paramount godly realm, yet Yi Xian had killed him as easily as if he was slaughtering a chicken. It was too terrifying. At this moment, he was even more certain that this young master had definitely been personally fostered by the sword master. When he thought up to this point, the panic he felt from before instantly vanished. In the distance, the old man's eyes opened wide behind Yi Xian, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. He had never expected that he would be instantly killed just like that. The old man hurriedly spoke when he sensed that his soul was disappearing swiftly. "Young master, you can't do that." Meanwhile, the green profound sword trembled violently and completely absorbed the old man's soul. Both his soul and soul were destroyed. Emissary Zhang shook his head and sighed. This old man's IQ is worrying. If he were to kneel down and beg for mercy now, he might still be able to live. He knew Yi Xian's character well. Yi Xian was amenable to coaxing but not coercion. As long as one behaved properly and did not intentionally provoke Yi Xian, then Yi Xian would be very easy to get along with. Yi Xian was really generous to his own people. In the distance, Yi Xian opened his palm, and the Qingxian sword returned to his hand. He looked down at the judicial department below. At this moment, a middle-aged man appeared in front of Yi Xian. The middle-aged man wore a long black robe, and his expression was cold. It was holding a long spear. At the same time, countless powerful auras appeared in the surroundings, and all of them locked onto Yi Xian. Emissary Zhang sighed softly when he saw this. At this moment, his heart was filled with discomfort. How did these pigs get to where they are now? Don't they understand the situation? This young master is really amazing. This young master is so monstrous and terrifying. He was definitely personally fostered by the sword master. Yet now, these fellows are actually targeting Yi Xian. Do they really intend to kill Yi Xian? But what about after they kill Yi Xian? As far as Emissary Zhang was concerned, surrendering was the right thing to do. The middle-aged man gazed at Yi Xian with an expressionless face, and he was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly raised his sword. The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed slightly. His right hand shook, and the spear in his hand stabbed forward. Hiss! The space in front of the middle-aged man was torn apart, and the spear slashed at Yi Xian's green profound sword like a bolt of lightning. Bang! The middle-aged man's pupils constricted as soon as the spear and sword collided. Because he noticed that the spear in his hand had split apart, an array of sword light had arrived before his forehead in the next moment. However, the middle-aged man's expression was unusually calm at this moment. Hiss! Yi Xian stabbed forward with his sword, but it missed because the middle-aged man had vanished on the spot. Yi Xian suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. Bang! A strand of terrifying force erupted, and a figure retreated explosively 30 kilometers away in front of Yi Xian. It was the middle-aged man. After the middle-aged man stopped moving, his expression changed drastically because a ray of blood-red light had slashed down from above him. The middle-aged man roared furiously, "Attack! Attack!" As soon as he finished speaking, over 10 terrifying auras charged towards Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Emissary Zhang spoke ferociously from afar, "Kill!" As soon as he spoke, he charged forward with Su Ming and the others. At the instant that Yi Xian's sword descended, the middle-aged man was blasted over 30 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped moving, his body was instantly obliterated, and only his soul remained. Meanwhile, Yi Xian slashed down once more. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted to the size of needles when he saw this attack. At this moment, he'd given up on resisting. Because he knew that he who only had his soul remaining was utterly incapable of resisting such a terrifying attack from Yi Xian. Hiss! As expected, Yi Xian's sword pierced through the center of the middle-aged man's forehead, and then it nailed his soul to the spot. Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of the middle-aged man. He was just about to attack when a terrifying aura suddenly charged up from within the punishment hall, and then a powerful pressure swept towards Yi Xian. At this moment, the entire starry sky seethed while countless strands of space were destroyed. Emissary Zhang suddenly roared furiously when he witnessed this scene. "Young master, watch out!" Yi Xian turned around and opened his palm. In an instant, countless strands of sword intent surged out and resisted that terrifying aura. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man by Yi Xian's side spoke with a trembling voice, "Manager, save me." Yi Xian suddenly swung his sword with a flip of his hand. The middle-aged man's soul was instantly obliterated. The middle-aged man was speechless. Yi Xian gazed at the middle-aged man in the distance, and he grinned ferociously. "Come, all of you can summon your ancestors." The others were speechless. Chapter 24:10. Summon the ancestor? Emissary Zhang and the others wore strange expressions. Summon the father to beat the son? The punishment division did not have the guts to do so. The punishment division manager glared at Yi Xian. "The punishment division is independent from all other organizations. How dare you?" Emissary Zhang suddenly shouted, "No matter how high the position of the punishment division is it higher than the young lords? Who are you? You are just subordinates of the Yang clan, and the young lord is the Yang clan's master. What, you want to be above the master?" The punishment division manager glanced at Emissary Zhang. "We only listen to Mistress Su. Even the young lord has no right to interfere with the punishment division." Emissary Zhang nodded. "If that's the case, then you can fight the young lord." The head of the punishment division frowned slightly. At this moment, Yi Xian's body in the distance suddenly became illusory. Seeing this scene, the head of the punishment division's expression changed drastically, and a ferocious glint flashed in his eyes. Formation. Against Yi Xian, he did not dare to be careless. Yi Xian had killed the old man too easily. As soon as the disciplinary division manager's voice fell, four beams of black light suddenly shot up into the sky from the disciplinary division below. In the next moment, a huge black circular array formation quietly appeared above the head of the disciplinary division manager. In the next moment, terrifying black thunderbolts directly fell in a straight line. In the end, these black thunderbolts converged into a divine thunderbolt that was tens of thousands of feet long. Boom! At this moment, the entire starry sky boiled. In the distance, Yi Xian opened his palm, and the azure sword in his hand suddenly turned into a sword ray that shot up into the sky. He did not use instant of invincibility. He wanted to see if he could easily kill these peerless gods without using instant of invincibility. When the azure sword shot up into the sky was directly torn apart. Boom! A sword ray suddenly slashed at the divine lightning. Rumble! The entire starry sky was annihilated. The divine lightning cracked, but it was not completely annihilated. Yi Xian was just about to attack again when the manager suddenly vanished on the spot, and then an afterimage tore through the surroundings. In the distance, Yi Xian frowned slightly. He flicked his sleeve and a wave of sword intent surged out. Rumble! The manager was forced to retreat by the sword intent. The manager was shocked. What kind of sword intent is this? Yi Xian didn't waste any time. He disappeared from where he was, and in the next moment, countless sword lights slashed at the manager. A vicious glint flashed across the chief's eyes as he shouted, "Array!" Boom! Suddenly, a blood-red chain shot into the sky from the punishment division. It was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it had arrived in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian frowned and slashed down with his sword. Rumble! A wave of sword light shattered, and Yi Xian was sent flying hundreds of thousands of feet away. However, the blood-red chain was completely unharmed. Because it wasn't the azure sword, he hadn't been able to destroy the chain. At this moment, his azure sword was being held back by the divine lightning. At this moment, the blood-red chain suddenly turned into a streak of blood-red light and rushed towards Yi Xian. Hiss! A huge rift had been torn open in the space before Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly raised his right hand. The human spirit on the tip of the azure sword trembled violently, and then a ray of golden light shot into the sky. Rumble. The divine lightning in the sky shattered. In the next moment, the azure sword returned to Yi Xian's hand, and Yi Xian slashed at it. Bang! Under everyone's gaze, Yi Xian shattered the blood-red chain with a single slash of his sword. Seeing this, the chief's pupils shrank. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss! A ray of sword light appeared in front of the manager. It was as swift as a bolt of lightning. A vicious glint flashed through the manager's eyes. He charged forward and punched forward. The punch carried a terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth. The power instantly swept out. Rumble. An explosion resounded, and the manager was blasted thousands of meters away by Yi Xian's attack. As soon as he stopped moving, a ray of sword light pierced through his forehead. At this moment, Yi Xian had appeared behind him. The surroundings suddenly fell deathly silent. A complete defeat. The experts of the punishment division had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. They hadn't expected their manager to be defeated just like that. Of course, they were even more furious that this young master actually dared to make a move against the punishment division. One must know that for so many years, no matter who it was, everyone had to give the punishment division face. Yet now, Yi Xian had actually dared to kill a member of the punishment division. Meanwhile, someone suddenly said, "Call for reinforcements. Call for reinforcements." As soon as the voice resounded, a voice transmission talisman suddenly shot out and vanished into the depths of the starry sky. Yi Xian turned to look at the expert of the punishment division who spoke. The expert said fiercely, "Even if you're the young master, you can't interfere with the punishment division. The punishment division only." Hiss. Before the expert could finish speaking, a sword pierced through his forehead. Boom! The expert's body shook violently, and then he was obliterated. Everyone. Yi Xian turned to look at the manager who hadn't completely vanished. At this moment, the manager was completely dumbfounded. He hadn't expected the young master to be so terrifying, and he hadn't expected the young master to not give him any face at all. Rage. The experts of the punishment division didn't fear, only rage. No one had ever disrespected the punishment division like this. Emissary Zhang sighed softly in his heart when he saw the anger on the experts' faces. These people were used to being flattered. They'd even forgotten who they were. If a person didn't know his place, then he wouldn't be far from death. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned his head to look at the powerhouses of the punishment division. When they saw Yi Xian looking at them, their expressions changed drastically. At this moment, they finally panicked. The young master before them wasn't just a young master, he possessed terrifying strength as well. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss. The manager was instantly obliterated by a ray of light, but Yi Xian didn't stop and charged towards the experts of the punishment division. When they saw Yi Xian charging towards them, the expressions of those strong men from the judicial department changed drastically. How could they resist him? Suddenly, space split apart in the distant sky, and then an old man appeared there. The old man grabbed towards the distance with his right hand. Bang! A mysterious force locked onto Yi Xian, who was about to attack. A cage. Yi Xian frowned slightly, and then he turned around and slashed with his sword. Hiss. The cage was instantly blasted open by this strike of his sword. Yi Xian gazed at the old man. The old man wore a black robe, and there was a small, town, character embroidered on his chest. The punishment division. The old man hesitated for a moment when he saw Yi Xian, and then he bowed slightly. Young master. Young master. Yi Xian gazed at the old man and remained silent. The old man spoke in a low voice, Young master, I'm the head commander of the punishment division, Elder Gu Shi. A head commander. The expressions of the experts of the punishment division changed violently, and they hurriedly knelt down and bowed. The head commander was the core circle of the Yang clan. In the Yang clan, a head commander of such a level was an extraordinary big shot. Su Ming's expression gradually became solemn as well. The head commander is here. It's finally not some small fry. Obviously, the higher-ups of the Yang clan were aware of Yi Xian's existence. Yi Xian's expression was calm, and then? The old man hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, I understand everything. I'll give young master an explanation for this." Yi Xian chuckled, "An explanation? What kind of explanation do you want?" The old man spoke in a low voice, "Execute Master Yuan immediately. Execute him immediately." Obviously, he was giving Yi Xian face. Since the matter had developed to this point, the punishment division naturally had to give Yi Xian face. Otherwise, would they really have to kill Yi Xian if they were to continue fighting? So, the punishment division had decided to compromise. After all, he was the young master. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and sighed, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter." All the others gazed at Yi Xian when they heard this. Yi Xian chuckled, "After this incident, I've come to understand something. The Yang clan has never taken me to be one of their own. Since it's like that, then why should I insist on staying in the Yang clan?" As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and the ring that the green-clothed man had given him floated out slowly. "From this moment onward, I'm not a member of the Yang clan anymore." The expressions of Su Ming and the others instantly changed violently when they heard this. He intends to give up his status as the young master of the Yang clan? Gu Shi's expression changed as well. He was just about to say something when Yi Xian turned around and left. Emissary Zhang didn't hesitate to follow Chen Shi. Right at this moment, the space in the distance suddenly split apart, and then a peerlessly beautiful woman walked out slowly from within it. Gu Shi's expression instantly changed violently when he saw this peerlessly beautiful woman, and he hurriedly knelt down and said, "Matriarch Su." Matriarch. Su Qingshi. Matriarch? Su Ming and the others instantly felt weak in the knees when they heard this form of address, and they immediately knelt down. She was the actual controller of the Yang clan. An old man with a sword in his hand was following behind Su Qingshi, and his aura was deep like an ocean and extremely terrifying. Yi Xian stopped moving, and then he turned around to gaze at Su Qingshi. At this moment, his bloodline was still in a state of activation. Su Qingshi gazed at Yi Xian in silence. Yi Xian chuckled, "Aunt Su, you should have known about all of this, right?" Su Qingshi shook her head slightly. "It was a misunderstanding, and you could have resolved it in a better way. However, you just had to use the most extreme method. After tempering yourself for so many years in the outside world, your character is still just like your father. You're still so extreme." Yi Xian looked Su Qingshi in the eyes and said, "The Yang clan has taken me to be an illegitimate child. Then allow me to ask you, Aunt Su, am I an illegitimate child?" Su Qingshi's beautiful brows knit together slightly. Yi Xian suddenly roared furiously, "Am I an illegitimate child?" Apart from anger, there was also a tinge of grievance in this roar. Seeing Yi Xian's roar, the old man with the sword behind Su Qingshi frowned slightly. He took a step forward, and a terrifying aura shrouded Yi Xian. "Be more polite when talking to the mistress." At this moment, a sword suddenly appeared on the scene. The old man's pupils constricted, and in the next moment, his head was sent flying. He was instantly killed. In the next moment, a woman in a plain dress appeared in front of Su Qingshi. She looked straight at Su Qingshi. "I'm talking to you, do you need to be more polite?" P.S. Early outburst. Requesting for votes. Everyone can follow me on TikTok, 17486888249. I'll be doing a live broadcast at 7 p.m. If everyone has time, you can come and take a look at my handsome face. At the same time, I'll pick some readers to send Sword Domain and Sword Supreme physical books. I remember it's 7 p.m. Those who have tickets can vote for me. I'd like to thank some readers who watched some videos to increase my income, especially tomato readers. Thank you for watching the free video, Electricity for Love, to increase my income. Thank you. I'd also like to thank all the readers for their donations and support, and Zongheng readers, especially those who spent money to read my books. Your support is my greatest motivation. I might be a water drinker, but I won't always be a water drinker. Tonight at 7 p.m., everyone, let's have a chat. I'm shameless, you guys can do whatever you want. TikTok, 17486888249. Chapter 2411. The Woman in a Plain Dress. Tianming. Su Qingshi's brows instantly knit together when she saw the woman in a plain dress. She hadn't expected that this woman would actually come here. She knew that this woman was unreasonable and protective of her older brother. This is going to be troublesome. Su Qingshi thought for a moment and was about to speak. Suddenly, space split apart in the distance, and then a man in green clothes walked out slowly. The Sword Master. Su Qingshi's expression grew even more unsightly when she saw the Sword Master. Now that these two extremes had met, the situation had become rather complicated. The Sword Master smiled as he gazed at the woman in a plain dress. He was about to speak when Su Qingshi suddenly walked over to the man in green clothes, took his hand, and shook her head. She knew that a battle would definitely occur if they were to go against each other. If they were to fight right now, then it would simply be a calamity. Because no matter if it was the current universe or the boundless universe, it wouldn't be able to endure their terrifying strength. The woman in a plain dress turned around to look at the man in green clothes. In the next moment, she opened her palm, and the walking sword appeared in her grasp. Meanwhile, Yi Xian walked over to her side, took her hand, and grinned. Forget it. The woman in a plain dress shook her head. Big brother, listen to me this time. The Yang clan? Who do they think they are? As soon as she finished speaking, the walking sword in her hand suddenly flew out and slashed towards the man in green clothes. They attacked. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Heavenrend. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically when he saw them suddenly attack. He immediately placed emissary Zhang, Su Ming, and the others into Xiao Ta's body. At the same time, he retreated behind the woman in a plain dress. Bang! All of a sudden, two beams of sword light burst forth. Rumble. In an instant, millions of stars were obliterated with the two of them at the center. Moreover, their residual energy hadn't dispersed just like that, and it was still spreading towards the surroundings at a terrifying speed. Based on its speed, it would only take a few breaths of time at most for it to destroy the entire universe or even the boundless universe. Just as the current universe was about to collapse completely, a mysterious force suddenly appeared in the current universe. With the appearance of this mysterious force, the power of the woman in the plain dress and the man in green was instantly blocked and stopped spreading. But it didn't take long for that mysterious power to shatter and be annihilated. Meanwhile, a black character suddenly appeared in an unknown expanse of the starry sky. As soon as this character appeared, a powerful force obstructed the remaining force of the attacks from the green-clothed man and woman. Not long after, that word suddenly split open. At this moment, a hand suddenly grabbed that word. In the next moment, an ancient book suddenly appeared in this starry sky. Rumble. With the appearance of this ancient book, a terrifying force forcefully blocked the remaining power of the woman in the plain dress and the man in the green robe. However, he could only block it, not eliminate it. In the starry sky, the plain-dressed woman and the green-robed man stood with their swords. The plain-dressed woman's face was cold, and there was not a trace of emotion in her eyes. The green-robed man gripped his sword tightly in his right hand. His sword was turning red bit by bit. Meanwhile, a phantom suddenly appeared not too far away from the two of them. As soon as this phantom appeared, the dayabi on Yi Xian's waist started trembling slightly. The phantom suddenly spoke softly, "If the two of you attack again, this current universe will immediately collapse, and the boundless universe will immediately collapse as well. A myriad of living beings will die because of the two of you." The plain-dressed woman turned around and glanced coldly at the phantom. The phantom said, "Don't look at me. If the two of you really want to fight, then I can't stop it. But if the two of you really fight now, have you thought about him?" As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. The plain-dressed woman fell silent for a moment, and then she looked at the man in green with a ferocious expression. "If it wasn't for my brother, then I would slaughter your Yang clan in front of you right now. Let's see what you can do then." As she spoke, she turned to look at Su Qingshi and spoke disdainfully, "Yang clan? What a piece of trash. Does my brother need something rare?" As she finished speaking, she turned around and pulled Yi Xian's hand as she walked towards the distance. After the plain-dressed woman left with Yi Xian, Su Qingshi turned to look at the man in green and said softly, "I'm sorry. I just wanted to train him, but I didn't expect things to turn out like this." The man in green shook his head. "This child's character is like mine, and he's very extreme most of the time." Su Qingshi nodded. It should be the words "illegitimate child" that hurt him. As she spoke, she sighed softly. Illegitimate child. She had overlooked an important thing, and that was, Yi Xian hadn't been recognized by the Yang clan until now. And Yi Xian, who had always been outside, had a grudge against the man in green. Now that he was treated like this by the Yang clan, he was naturally angry. Under such circumstances, the people of the Yang clan still targeted him, so he was naturally angry. As if she thought of something, Su Qingshi looked at the man in green and said again, "I'm sorry. I didn't handle this matter well." The man in green took Su Qingshi's hand and said softly, "With this kid's character, I'm afraid he won't return to the Yang clan." Su Qingshi fell silent. She was able to sense that Yi Xian's character was very similar to the man in green, and they were both extreme most of the time. Once he chose to leave the Yang clan, then he would definitely not return. The man in green suddenly turned around to gaze at the figure in the distance, and he didn't speak. The figure remained silent for a moment before he said, "It isn't as simple as you think." The man in green fell silent. The figure sighed softly. "The development of the matter has completely exceeded my control. All I can say is that all of you take care of yourselves. As for whether the outcome of the story is sad or happy, it's all in your own hands." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure gradually became ethereal, and it didn't take long for him to vanish completely. The man in green fell silent for a moment before he said, "Qingshi, I'll be leaving." As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot. Su Qingshi remained silent for a long time on the spot before she said, "Send my order." From this moment onward, Yi Xian is the young master of the Yang clan. Seeing him is like seeing the sword master. The expressions of Gu Shi and the others instantly changed violently when they heard this. Seeing him is like seeing the sword master. Obviously, Yi Xian was the next patriarch of the Yang clan. Su Qingshi sighed softly, that pair of father and son. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. After the man in green and the woman in a plain dress collided with each other, they directly damaged the quintessence of the entire universe. It could be said that the current universe had suffered a huge blow to its vitality. If Dayabi's master hadn't forcefully interfered, then the entire universe would have probably been obliterated by now. Their strength was truly too terrifying. Even though Dayabi's master had protected this universe, it had still been heavily damaged, and its vitality had been damaged. Qing held Yi Xian's hand as they walked slowly through the starry sky. Yi Xian smiled. "Qing, what are you doing here?" Qing spoke softly, "I missed you." Yi Xian grinned, "Me too." As he spoke, he held Qing's hand tightly. Qing turned to look at Yi Xian. "Brother, are you tired of fighting alone?" Yi Xian shook his head, "Not at all." Qing fell silent. Yi Xian smiled, "I know what you mean, Qing, but I think it's good this way. I can slowly fight on my own. If I rely on you for everything, then I'll never be able to surpass you. Qing wanted to say something, but stopped. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Are you trying to say that no matter how hard I work, I won't be able to surpass you? Qing shook her head. Brother, do you know what I discovered? Yi Xian was curious. What did you discover? Qing looked up at the starry sky and spoke softly. A person who writes the fate of others, his fate is also being written by others. Yi Xian was puzzled. Qing what do you mean? Qing shook her head, but didn't speak. Yi Xian, Qing suddenly stopped, her hands wrapped around Yi Xian's waist, and then leaned her head on Yi Xian's chest. Her eyes slowly closed, a charming smile appeared on her face. Yi Xian said softly, Qing Qing said, if stories have an ending, I hope it's like this. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, and asked in his mind, by bro, did something happen? Dedeabi said, I don't know. Yi Xian frowned, and was about to speak, but Dedeabi suddenly said, brother, how would I know about her? Anyway, as long as nothing happens to you, she'll be fine, but if something happens to you, she. Dedeabi didn't continue. Over the past few days, it had finally come to understand one thing. That was, Destiny's happiness and anger depended entirely on Yi Xian. She couldn't bear to see Yi Xian suffer even the slightest grievance. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, Qing tell me, did you discover something again? Qing said softly, it's nothing, brother, you just need to live well, I'll take care of everything. Yi Xian, Qing suddenly smiled, brother, I want to go shopping with you, can I? Yi Xian collected his thoughts and smiled, where? Qing blinked her eyes. Anywhere is fine. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, I want to go to Arcane territory. Qing was a little curious. Arcane territory? Yi Xian nodded and said seriously, we visited some mysterious secret realms before. They were very dangerous, so I want to show you around the secret realms. Qing smiled, sure. Yi Xian laughed, and he suddenly turned to look into the distance, Lan Qing. As soon as he finished speaking, the space not far away was suddenly torn apart. The next moment, Lan Qing showed up in front of Yi Xian and his sister. Lan Qing bowed respectfully, young Master Yi. Yi Xian smiled, help me investigate where there are arcane territories or ruins, I want to go shopping. Lan Qing hesitated, and then said, Arcane territory or ruins? Yi Xian nodded, yes. Lan Qing said solemnly, young Master Yi, I know something about Dao Yi, but some places are extremely dangerous. Yi Xian suddenly waved his hand, and said heroically, the more dangerous the better, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. Lan Qing. 7017K. Chapter 24:12. The Secret Area Ruins. In this vast universe, there were many unknown regions. Some of these regions were the cave ruins of ancient almighty figures, some were special regions, and some were the ruins of ancient sects. These cave ruins were usually extremely dangerous. Of course, at the same time, there were also countless opportunities. Yi Xian held Qing's hand and slowly walked towards the distant starry sky. In the Milky Way, the brother and sister held hands, and the starry sky around them was deep and distant. Yi Xian suddenly said, Qing, why are you here all of a sudden? Is there something wrong? He was quite surprised by Qing's sudden appearance. Qing still said, I missed you. I missed you. Yi Xian tightened his grip on Qing's hand, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. His heart was as sweet as honey. Qing's kindness to him was the purest in the world. Having a sister like this was a blessing in this life. At this moment, Lan Qing suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and he bowed deeply to Yi Xian and said, Young Master Yi, there are two ruins, the myriad tombs and the heavens burial grounds. Yi Xian smiled, give me the address. Lan Qing hesitated for a moment, and then he bowed deeply. Young Master Yi, forgive me for speaking out of turn. These two places are unimaginably dangerous. You. Yi Xian said seriously, I'm not afraid. Lan Qing smiled bitterly. Young Master Yi, let me tell you something, and you'll know how terrifying these two places are. It's said that a group of extremely terrifying ancient experts are buried in the myriad tombs. According to the investigation of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, this place might be from the legendary Myriad Race era. The Myriad Race era. Yi Xian frowned slightly. You know about the Myriad Race era? He knew that those sages were from the legendary Myriad Race era. Lan Qing shook his head. I don't know. It's just that the pavilion master mentioned that this was an extremely brilliant era, and there were countless outstanding people in that era. It can be said that this era of the myriad races is the most advanced era in the history of our current universe. As he spoke, he smiled. In the words of the pavilion master, the era of the myriad races is the leader of countless eras. The leader of the era. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. Lan Qing said seriously, Young Master Yi, the myriad tombs divine realm and the heavens burial ground might both be from the era of the myriad races. As far as I know, the Yang clan once had experts explore these two places, but they never came back. Yi Xian smiled and said, I understand. If I was alone, I definitely wouldn't go, but I'm not alone. As he spoke, he held Qing'er's hand and waved it. He smiled and said, I'll go with my sister. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Qing'er's lips curled into a smile that made the universe pale in comparison. Lan Qing glanced at the plainly dressed woman. The plainly dressed woman was like an ordinary person. She stood there without the slightest bit of aura. She was simply too ordinary. Of course, Lan Qing didn't really think that the woman in front of him was ordinary. Lan Qing bowed slightly, then took out 2 scrolls and handed them to Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, this is the address. Yi Xian took the 2 scrolls and said with a smile, Thank you. As he spoke, he opened one of the scrolls. He glanced at it, then turned to look at Qing'er. Let's go. Qing'er nodded, then disappeared into the distant end of the starry sky with Yi Xian. Amidst the boundless starry sky, Yi Xian flew on his sword. Qing'er was by his side. Qing'er didn't fly on her sword. She simply held Yi Xian's hand with a faint smile on her face. Yi Xian was a little curious. Qing'er, you fought with my father with your sword earlier, and that sword attack almost destroyed the entire universe and the boundless universe. Why are your swords so powerful? Qing'er was silent. Yi Xian blinked. Is it hard to explain? Qing'er turned to look at Yi Xian. I'm thinking how to simplify a complicated question so that you can understand it. Yi Xian's expression froze. Qing'er said softly, within the realm, all are ants. Outside the realm, all are ants. A true expert isn't bound by anything. He understands everything and transcends everything. She turned to look at Yi Xian. If you ask me how strong I am, I can't answer you. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Qing'er smiled. Because I don't know how strong I am. Yi Xian asked, Invincible? Qing'er shook her head. Saying I'm invincible is underestimating me. Yi Xian was speechless. Suddenly, Xiao Ta asked, Sister Tianming, between you and Master, who is stronger? Yi Xian looked at Qing'er. In fact, he also wanted to know the answer. Qing'er, Dad, and Big Brother. Who is stronger? Qing'er's expression was calm. You will know the answer when I become invincible. Yi Xian was silent. He knew that the 3 swords would fight one day. No one could stop it. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian asked again, Qing'er, Qingxiu used to be your original body. In other words, if both of you are willing, you can merge again, right? Qing'er nodded. Yes. Yi Xian looked at Qing'er. If you combine, will you become stronger? Qing'er smiled. Take a guess. Yi Xian was taken aback. Then he shook his head with a smile. Qing'er, you're naughty. Qing'er looked at Yi Xian. We don't need to combine. I alone can protect you for life. Yi Xian was silent for a moment. So, no matter in the current universe or the boundless universe, no one can threaten me. Am I right? Qing'er nodded. Yes. With me here, even if they join hands, they can't kill you. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile. Qing'er said, you won't die, but it doesn't mean you won't. At this point, she didn't say anything else. Yi Xian was curious. What? Qing'er was silent for a long time. You won't die, but it doesn't mean your story won't end. Like a book, the story will come to an end one day. She leaned her head on Yi Xian's shoulder. As long as I'm here, my brother's story will never end. If he dares, I'll finish him first. She glanced at a spot, and a cold light flashed in her eyes. If you dare to let the next person of destiny appear, I'll kill you as well. Someone was speechless. Yi Xian was about to speak when he sensed something. He turned and saw a man and a woman standing in the depths of the starry sky. The man wore golden armor and held a long spear in his hand. There was a murderous aura between his brows. The woman wore white armor and held a sheathed longsword in her hand. At this moment, both of them were looking at Yi Xian and Qing, curiously. Seeing them looking at him, Yi Xian smiled as a greeting. Meanwhile, the man and woman suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The man gazed at Yi Xian. Are you going to the Myriad Tomb's divine domain? Yi Xian was slightly stunned, and then he smiled, yes. The man sized up Yi Xian and shook his head, you're just at the high god realm. Not to mention the Myriad Tomb's divine domain, you can't even enter the river of death at the borders. Yi Xian smiled, are the two of you going to the Myriad Tomb's divine domain as well? The man replied, yes. Yi Xian smiled, we're just going to have a look. The man glanced at Yi Xian and remained silent. On the other hand, the white-armored woman's gaze was fixed on Qing-er. The white-armored woman had always been very confident, but when she saw Qing-er, she suddenly felt slightly ashamed of herself. Yi Xian paid no attention to them. He turned to look at Qing-er, let's go. Qing-er nodded. She preferred to be alone with Yi Xian. Apart from Yi Xian, she didn't like anyone else looking at her. After Yi Xian and Qing'er disappeared in the distance, the man next to the woman whispered, the pen on that man's waist is the legendary Dedeabi. The woman nodded, I saw it. The man's eyes flickered, no one knew what he was thinking. The woman saw through the man's intentions, although this person's cultivation is low, he has Dedeabi. I'm afraid his background isn't simple. The man smiled, no matter how extraordinary he is, he's just at the high god realm. As he spoke, he opened his palm. In his hand, there was a small beast shaped like a mouse. At this moment, the little monster was looking in the direction Yi Xian left with a fanatical gaze. The man looked into the distance. The treasure-seeking mouse said that this person has many divine items, at least tens of billions of universe veins, and the legendary universe vein. Universe vein. Hearing this, the woman in white frowned. Are you sure? The man looked at the treasure-seeking mouse and smiled. I'm sure. Very sure. After a moment of silence, the woman said, but the more it is so, the more I feel that this person isn't simple, especially the woman next to him. The man asked, that woman? The woman nodded, yes. This person. The man suddenly shook his head and smiled, that woman is soft and weak. Even if she is strong, how strong can she be? With that, he smiled, I've never seen the treasure-seeking mouse so excited and fanatical. The woman in white was still worried. The man continued, this is the last one. Dedeabi is yours. Divide the universe veins equally. After a moment of silence, the woman said, okay. In the next moment, the two disappeared. At the end of the distant starry sky, Yi Xian and Qing'er suddenly stopped. The man and the woman in white appeared in front of them. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. Just as he was about to speak, the man suddenly disappeared and stabbed at Yi Xian with his spear. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. What the hell? Ah! At this moment, a sword suddenly pierced the man's forehead without any warning. Boom! The man was directly nailed to the ground. That sword was the walking sword. The man and the woman in white were completely dumbfounded. The man looked at Yi Xian and Qing'er in horror. You. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, "What are you doing?" The man suddenly said in horror, I am from the Zhongshuan sect. Qing'er suddenly said calmly, "Where is the Zhongshuan sect? Point me in the direction." The man looked at Qing'er in horror. You. At this moment, the deity suddenly said, "Right." Qing'er opened her palm, and the walking sword suddenly flew out. Tens of millions of miles to the right, in a certain world, a sword suddenly fell straight into an extremely powerful sect. Rumble. Before the experts in the sect could react, their bodies and souls were destroyed. The Zhongshuan sect no longer existed in this world. P.S. Thank all the readers for their gifts and support. After erupting, you need to recuperate for a period of time. 7017K. Chapter 24:13. In the starry sky, Qing'er opened her palm and the azure sword returned to her hand. The man stared at Qing'er in horror. You, what did you do? Qing'er looked straight at the man. Do you have a backer? If you do, point me in another direction. Yi Xian, the man seemed to realize something. He suddenly cried out in horror, You destroyed my Zhongshuan sect. Who are you? At this moment, he had already reached the pinnacle of shock. Qing'er flicked her sleeve. Boom! The man's spirit was destroyed. The white-armored woman trembled, cold sweat pouring down her back. Qing'er looked at the white-armored woman. The white-armored woman said in a trembling voice, Senior. Qing'er suddenly asked, Where is your home? Yi Xian, the white-armored woman's face was pale. Senior, at this moment, a voice suddenly came from the distant horizon, Sir, please show mercy. We are from the Li clan. Qi. A sword suddenly streaked across the sky, and the voice came to an abrupt stop. Instant kill. Qing'er looked at the white-armored woman in front of her. Where is the Li clan? The white-armored woman's face was pale. She suddenly knelt in front of the plain-dressed woman and said in a trembling voice, Senior. Qing'er shook her head. Don't think of yourself as pitiful. If the weak had met the two of you today, how could they have survived? Saying so, she waved her fingers. Qi. The white-armored woman's head flew into the air. Blood spurted out like a fountain. Qing'er opened her palm and clenched her right hand at the white-armored woman's head. In the next moment, the white-armored woman's memories were directly grasped by her. Qing'er suddenly pointed with her fingers. Go! The walking sword disappeared at the end of the starry sky. In an unknown world, a sword appeared in the sky above a city without any warning. Boom! Following the appearance of this sword, the entire city suddenly erupted into a frenzy. Countless people raised their heads to look at the sword, their eyes filled with fear and despair. Impudent! At this moment, a furious shout suddenly resounded from within the city. How dare you offend my Li clan? As his voice fell, a terrifying aura suddenly soared into the sky from the city. At this moment, the walk sword suddenly descended in a straight line. Boom! In an instant, the entire city was forcibly wiped out. The Li clan no longer existed in this world. In the starry space, the plain-dressed woman opened her right hand and the walking sword returned to her. She turned to look at Yi Xian and smiled. Let's go. Yi Xian nodded. All right. He opened his palm as he spoke, and 2 storage rings flew into his hand. They were none other than the storage rings of the man and woman in white armor. There were close to 3 billion universe veins in the 2 storage rings. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. He put away the storage ring and pulled Qing away. Not long after, the siblings arrived in front of a black river. This river stretched across the starry sky, and they couldn't see the end. The entire river was pitch black. Looking at the river, Yi Xian said softly, "This should be the river of death that the man mentioned just now." Qing looked at the river of death with a calm expression. Yi Xian blinked. "Qing is there any danger in this river?" Qing shook her head. Yi Xian smiled and was about to cross the river. At this moment, a terrifying aura spread out from the river. It spread out from the water. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically when he sensed this terrifying aura. At this moment, he actually smelled the aura of death. So strong. The owner of this aura definitely far exceeded End Realm. Yi Xian tightened his grip on Qing's hand and said softly, "Qing, didn't you say that it wasn't dangerous?" Qing looked at the river and said, "Is it dangerous?" Yi Xian's expression froze. At this moment, a vicious-looking man slowly floated up from the river. His face was really ugly, and he only had one eye. The rest of his face was covered in all sorts of poisonous pus, and it looked really disgusting. The man smiled and was about to speak when Qing suddenly said, "You are so ugly, don't scare my brother." As she said this, she raised her hand and slashed. Pooh! The man was directly wiped out by that sword. It ended right after he appeared. Yi Xian, right at this moment, the river suddenly trembled. In the next moment, an illusory figure slowly floated up from the bottom of the river. The illusory figure gradually solidified. It was a man, and this man looked extremely ugly. His entire body was rotten, and there was pus flowing out of it. It was extremely disgusting. The man said viciously, "Who are you? You actually dare?" Qing suddenly frowned, "Ugly." As she said this, she raised her hand and slashed. Hong. The man who just appeared vanished without a trace, and it was as if he'd never been there. Qing turned to look at Yi Xian, and she grinned, "Big brother is still the best looking." Yi Xian, suddenly, the bottom of the river surged once more, and it didn't take long for a woman to float up slowly. Qing looked at the woman, and the walk sword in her hand had started to tremble. However, this time, Qing didn't directly kill her, because that woman's appearance was not bad, with delicate features. The woman looked at Qing with fear in her eyes. "You are?" Qing's expression was calm, and she didn't answer. Yi Xian suddenly said, "We just want to cross the river." The woman looked at Yi Xian, sized Yi Xian up, and then asked, "Young master, what's your name?" Yi Xian smiled, "Yi Xian." The woman hesitated for a moment, and then she said, "Young master Yi, this is the river of death, and we'll arrive at the myriad tombs divine domain once we cross it. We made an agreement with the people there that no one is allowed to cross, so, hiss." Suddenly, a sword was pressed against the center of the woman's forehead. The woman's figure stiffened. Qing gazed at the woman. "Say that again." The woman hurriedly spoke in a trembling voice, "Cross. You can cross. The two of you can cross." Yi Xian was speechless. Qing nodded slightly, and then she took Yi Xian's hand and walked towards the distance. When they arrived in front of the river, the water actually parted on its own, and Yi Xian could sense that the water seemed to be afraid of them. The river has a spirit. However, Yi Xian didn't think too much about it. After Yi Xian and Qing left, the woman in the river instantly heaved a sigh of relief, and her entire body seemed like a pile of mud as she lay limply in the river. At this moment, her eyes were filled with disbelief. She hadn't imagined that someone could actually be so strong. After all, her strength could be considered to be at the top here, but she actually hadn't been able to fight back at all when facing that woman. She had a feeling that in front of that woman, she was less than an ant. A long time passed before the woman shook her head. How terrifying. As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished into the river. Only a single ripple remained on the surface of the river. Yi Xian and Qing walked into the distance, and before long, they arrived at a mountain range. As soon as they entered the mountain range, Yi Xian frowned. He looked around, and felt a bone-chilling cold wind blowing around him. Yi Xian looked into the distance again. Not far away, there was a small village. In front of the village was a crooked tree, and on the tree sat a black three-eyed cat. At this moment, the cat was staring at him. Yi Xian glanced at the village, and the entire area was filled with yin qi. There was no one around, and it looked extremely cold and eerie. Yi Xian turned to look at Qing. Qing, don't you think it's strange? Qing's expression was calm. No. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. You don't think it's dangerous either, do you? Qing nodded. It's not dangerous. Yi Xian nodded. He held Qing's hand and walked toward the village. If he was alone, he would be a little afraid. Although he was strong now, he wasn't invincible. Especially when he had the rule that he couldn't stay cool for more than 3 days. But now, did he need to panic? Holding Qing's hand, I have the universe. What's there to be afraid of? He was fearless. At the entrance of the village, the three-eyed cat suddenly glanced at Qing, and Qing turned around to glance at it. The three-eyed cat's pupils constricted when Qing's gaze fell upon it, and then it fell from the tree. After that, it fled madly towards the distance. Yi Xian looked at Qing. What's wrong with the cat? Qing's expression was calm. I'm afraid it's hungry. It's going to find something to eat. Yi Xian was speechless. As they entered the village, a mournful melody came from the side. Hearing this voice, Yi Xian frowned slightly. He turned his head and looked into the distance. Next to a house not far away, an old man was lying on a chair and playing an arrow. The more he played, the sadder it became. Yi Xian sized up the old man. The old man was wearing a simple linen robe, and there was a puppy lying next to him. The old man stopped abruptly. He looked at Yi Xian and chuckled. Interesting. Interesting. Yi Xian smiled. What do you mean by interesting, senior? The old man smiled. It's been so many years, but this is the first time someone has crossed the river of death and reached here. Kid, you have some skills. Yi Xian was silent. Can't these people sense Qing's presence? Or could it be that Qing didn't look like an expert? Yi Xian turned to look at Qing. Seeing Yi Xian's gaze, Qing smiled gently. Yi Xian was silent. To be honest, this gentle Qing doesn't look like a master. The old man suddenly stood up. He walked slowly to Yi Xian and Qing. He sized up Yi Xian and chuckled mockingly. The ignorant are fearless. Do you know what this place is? Yi Xian answered in a low voice. The Myriad Tombs realm. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Dedeabi. You actually brought Dedeabi with you. Interesting. He looked at Qing. He looked at Qing. Qing suddenly said, What are you looking at? The old man was surprised at first, but then he smiled. Everyone loves beauty. Young lady, you're so beautiful. Isn't it normal for me to look at you? Not only do I have to look, but I have to look carefully. Ha! Chi! A sword suddenly pierced the old man's forehead and nailed him to a house in the distance. Qing looked at the old man. Do you think you're funny? The old man. Chapter 24:14. In the distance, the old man who was nailed to the house looked at the woman in the plain dress in astonishment. Of course, he was dumbfounded. One sword. He did not expect that he could not even withstand one sword from the other party. What kind of demon is this? Yi Xian suddenly pulled Qing's hand and said with a smile, let's go. Being held by Yi Xian, the frost on Qing's face instantly melted. She nodded and said softly, okay. After saying that, the siblings walked away. Behind them, the old man suddenly said with a trembling voice, someone, save me. At this moment, although the sword had disappeared, there was still a sword energy between his eyebrows. That sword energy had locked onto him. The old man was in despair. I shouldn't have acted tough. Now, I've fallen into a trap. Yi Xian pulled Qing's hand and walked into the depths of the village. He had to admit that holding Qing's hand really gave him a sense of security. There was no fear. At the thought of this, the corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up involuntarily. After reaching the depths of the village, Yi Xian found that most of the houses in the village were empty. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. In the courtyard of a house on his right, there was a little girl in a black dress sitting on a swing. The little girl's hair was extremely long, reaching the ground. Only half of her face was exposed, and it was very pale. Yi Xian looked at the little girl and withdrew his gaze. Then, he pulled Qing's and continued to walk into the distance. This time, he was here to look for treasures, not to act tough. At this moment, the little girl suddenly laughed sinisterly. Yi Xian frowned and turned to look at the little girl. Little girl, what are you laughing at? The little girl looked at Yi Xian and said, your death is near. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, you know how to read fortunes? The little girl nodded. Yi Xian smiled and said, why would my death be near? The little girl grinned. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. Tianji. Yi Xian looked down at Dedeabi on his waist. By bro, is she right? After a moment of silence, Dedeabi said, young Master Yi, she's bragging. The current you is absolutely invincible among invincibles. Yi Xian nodded. I think so too, haha. Dedeabi, at this time, the little girl suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and Qing'er like a ghost. She looked straight at Yi Xian and said, anyone who enters this village can never leave. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The little girl giggled, because this village has an incomparably powerful restriction. As she spoke, she pointed at the exit of the village in the distance. There was a floating black iron sword there. Yi Xian glanced at the black iron sword and said, this is? The little girl smiled, this sword will crush anyone who dares to leave. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he opened his palm. A ray of sword light flew out of the village. However, it had only just arrived at the entrance when it was slashed into pieces by the black iron sword. Yi Xian's expression became solemn when he witnessed this scene, but it instantly returned to normal. What am I afraid of? Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly smiled and said, see, you can't leave. Yi Xian spoke with a serious expression, let's make a bet. The little girl frowned slightly, what do you want to bet? Yi Xian smiled, what do you have? The little girl gazed at Yi Xian for a long time before she said, money. As she spoke, she opened her palm, and there was a spatial ring there. There were over 5 billion universe veins within it. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. The little girl grinned, what do you have? Yi Xian also opened his palm. There was a storage ring in his palm, and there were exactly 5 billion universe veins in it. The little girl took a deep and long glance at Yi Xian, and then she said, you can leave now. Yi Xian nodded, and then he took Qing'er's hand and walked out. Yi Xian gazed at the black iron sword and remained silent. Of course, he wasn't afraid. Not to mention a sword, he wouldn't even be afraid even if his father was on guard here. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the entrance of the village. The little girl stared fixedly at Yi Xian and his younger sister. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to walk out of the village with Qing. However, the sword didn't move at all. The little girl's eyes opened wide with disbelief when she witnessed this scene. Outside the village, Yi Xian raised his head to glance at the floating sword, and then he smiled. That sword actually gave me face. Ha ha ha. Xiao Ta couldn't help but say, young master, it might have given big sister Tianming face. Yi Xian's face darkened. No one will think you're mute even if you don't speak. Xiao Ta was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, the little girl spoke in a low voice. How did you do it? Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and gazed at the little girl with a smile. You've lost. The little girl fell silent. Yi Xian grinned. You wouldn't go back on your word, right? The little girl remained silent for a moment before she opened her palm, and the spatial ring slowly floated over to Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't refuse and just put the spatial ring away. Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly said, Can you take me out? Yi Xian gazed at the little girl, and her eyes were filled with a pleading expression. Yi Xian smiled, Sure. The little girl was first stunned, and then she was overjoyed. Really? Yi Xian nodded. Come out. The little girl hurriedly ran over, but when she neared the village entrance, she stopped and looked at the black sword with fear. Yi Xian smiled. Don't worry, with me around, it wouldn't dare to hurt you. The black sword. The little girl hesitated for a moment, and then slowly walked out of the village. When she walked out of the village, the black sword still didn't budge. Seeing this, the little girl instantly breathed a sigh of relief, and she turned to look at Yi Xian. You're so strong. Yi Xian laughed, of course. Saying so, he looked at the black sword, and was tempted. Qing suddenly grabbed Yi Xian's hand and shook her head. It's just a lousy sword, it's meaningless. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then nodded, Okay. Let's go. After saying so, he pulled Qing and was about to leave, but then, as if thinking of something, he turned to look at the little girl. Do you have anywhere else to go? The little girl shook her head. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Then, do you want to go to my academy? The little girl blinked. Academy? Yi Xian nodded, and he quickly took out a wooden token and handed it to the little girl. Come, from now on, you're a student of my Guanxian Academy. The little girl hesitated for a moment, and then said, But I don't really like to study. Yi Xian smiled. It's okay, you can be my fighter. Fighter. The little girl was speechless. The little girl was still a little hesitant, because the man in front of her didn't seem very reliable. Yi Xian smiled. If you're not willing, it's okay. You're free now, you can leave. The little girl looked at Yi Xian. Do you know where this place is? Yi Xian smiled. Myriad Tombs Divine Realm. The little girl shook her head. This place belongs to the Emperor Yin tribe. During the Myriad clan era, the Emperor Yin tribe was invaded by terrifying forces from the boundless universe. In that battle, the entire Emperor Yin tribe was destroyed, and countless clansmen died. The seal has been sealed. Saying that, she shook her head slightly. Very tragic. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Are you also from the Emperor Yin tribe? The little girl was silent for a moment, and then nodded. The Myriad clan era. Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and the Human King's sacred seal appeared in his hand. When she saw the Human King's sacred seal in Yi Xian's hand, the little girl's pupils suddenly shrank. You're the king of the human race. Yi Xian nodded. The little girl looked at Yi Xian, and her expression became strange. King of the human race. You're so weak. Hearing that, Yi Xian's face immediately darkened. What are you saying? What do you mean I'm weak? The little girl giggled. You're only at the high god realm, so weak. Yi Xian was speechless. The little girl said again, Tsk tisk, I really didn't expect to meet the king of the human race here. How many survivors of the human race are there now? Yi Xian shook his head. Not many. The little girl looked sad. Our Emperor Yin doesn't have many left. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Does your Emperor Yin have a king? The little girl shook her head. After the king fell, our Emperor Yin still has no king. Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Look at me, do you think I'm suitable to be the king of your Emperor Yin?" The little girl looked at Yi Xian in astonishment. "You?" Yi Xian nodded. The little girl said in a deep voice, "You're not from the Emperor Yin." Yi Xian said with a smile, "So what? I don't care." The little girl hesitated, and then said, "We care." "Yi Xian," the little girl suddenly said, "I'll take you to the Emperor Yin royal city." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What for?" The little girl said in a deep voice, "That place seems to be sealed now. If you can save the powerhouses of my Emperor Yin tribe, maybe they will really be willing to respect you as king." Yi Xian thought for a while, then nodded, "Okay." The little girl smiled and said, "Let's go." After saying that, she floated directly into the distance. Yi Xian pulled Qing and hurriedly followed. The little girl kept introducing the Emperor Yin tribe to Yi Xian along the way, and from the little girl, he also learned some things about the Myriad Race era. In the Myriad Race era, there were 3 super races, one of which was the human race. In addition to the human race, there was the heavenly race and the most powerful holy race. It was these 3 races that led the Myriad race to resist the terrifying forces of the boundless universe. Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, he was thinking about the Yang clan. If the current Yang clan was placed in the Myriad race era, what level would it be? Of course, that was if his father was excluded. With his father, the Yang clan would definitely be first, but without his father? Yi Xian shook his head and stopped thinking about this question. Yang clan. Anyway, he would not return to the Yang clan now. Young master? He really did not care too much. At this moment, a sinister laugh suddenly came from afar. The 3 looked over, and not far away, an old man appeared in their line of sight like a ghost. The old man had a hunched back and an aged face. At this moment, he was looking at Yi Xian and the others with a sinister smile. Seeing this old man, the little girl's expression became solemn. The old man's gaze suddenly fell on Qing. He looked at Qing and then smiled sinisterly, "So beautiful. TSK, this figure." A sword suddenly pierced the old man's eyebrows, and the old man was directly nailed to the spot. The old man's eyes were wide open, and his mind was blank. Who am I? Where am I? At this moment, Dedeabi suddenly sighed in a low voice, a max-level bug boss visiting the novice village. Chapter 24:15. Instant kill. Next to Yi Xian, the little girl was completely dumbfounded. She looked at the plain-dressed woman in disbelief, and her mouth opened wide enough to fit an egg. The most dumbfounded person was the old man. He didn't even realize that there was a sword in his head. At this moment, the plain-dressed woman opened her palm, and the old man's storage ring floated in front of her. She picked up the storage ring, turned around, and placed it in Yi Xian's hand. Yi Xian, the plain-dressed woman smiled. "Let's go." Yi Xian nodded. The 3 of them continued forward. Behind them, the old man was dumbfounded. At this moment, he was locked by a sword light and couldn't move at all. At this moment, he was already extremely shocked. He couldn't fight back at all. Just how powerful was this person? The more he thought about it, the more terrified he became. In the distance, the little girl next to Yi Xian glanced at Qing from time to time, and her eyes were filled with fear. She finally understood why the black sword didn't dare to attack. It wasn't because of Yi Xian, but because of this woman. The little girl threw Yi Xian a look. This man is a man with a backer. On the way, Yi Xian glanced at the old man's storage ring, and his lips curled up slightly. This old man's storage ring actually contained billions of universe veins. Huge wealth. Yi Xian couldn't help but glance at Qing. It was good to follow Qing. They cleared all the stages. Not long after, the three of them arrived in front of an ancient city. This city was very desolate, and the city walls were covered in grass. The entire city was extremely eerie, like a ghost city. At this moment, the little girl suddenly said, "Emperor Ean's city." Looking at Emperor Ean's city, a complicated look flashed through the little girl's eyes. Not long ago, this place was extremely glorious, but now it was so desolate. At this moment, the little girl seemed to have noticed something, and her pupils suddenly constricted. She said in shock, "Be careful. It's a spirit." Just as she said that, a black figure suddenly appeared in the distance. This black figure held a giant sickle, and his long hair dragged on the ground. Spirit. The little girl looked at the spirit, her eyes filled with fear. This is a spirit from the boundless universe, and it's a spirit general. Yi Xian looked at the panicking little girl and smiled, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." The little girl, in the distance, the spirit suddenly walked slowly toward Yi Xian and the other two. When he walked toward Yi Xian and the other two, a huge black cloud suddenly appeared above his head, and this black cloud slowly spread toward Yi Xian and the other two. The little girl stared at the spirit and said, "This spirit knows how to die. Do you see that black cloud? That is the death zone of legend. Once one is enveloped by it, then one will be trapped there for eternity, unable to reincarnate." Yi Xian nodded and looked at the spirit. "It's not too late if you surrender now." The little girl turned to look at Yi Xian in shock. At this time, the spirit suddenly turned into a shadow and disappeared. In an instant, the black cloud appeared above Yi Xian and the other two, and at the same time, a blood-red light directly slashed at Yi Xian's throat. Yi Xian's pupils suddenly shrank. At this moment, he felt like his head was flying out. This slash was faster than anything. Yi Xian was shocked. What kind of terrifying speed was this? He didn't even have the strength to fight back. Just when the red light was half an inch away from Yi Xian's throat, "Chi!" All of a sudden, the distant city wall trembled violently, and then, a shadow was nailed to the city wall. It was the spirit. At this moment, the spirit was nailed to the city wall by a sword. Above Yi Xian and the other two, the black cloud had disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Next to Yi Xian, the little girl was dumbfounded. Soon, she turned to look at the woman in the plain dress, F***ck, Yi Xian. Qing Er's expression was calm. She glanced at the little girl. "What's wrong?" The little girl gulped, and then said, You're so powerful." Qing nodded, "Yes." The little girl, in the distance, the spirit suddenly hoarsely said, "You. Who are you?" The voice was full of fear. Yi Xian smiled, "Yi Xian." The spirit said, "I didn't ask you." Yi Xian's expression froze, and then he shook his head. Qing kill him. This person doesn't know any better." Qing flicked her sleeves. Boom. The spirit was directly erased. The spirit, the little girl glanced at Yi Xian, but did not speak. She finally saw it. Although this man's strength was not as strong as this woman was very obedient to this man. At this time, Qing opened her palm, and a storage ring slowly floated into her hand. Then, she placed the ring in Yi Xian's palm. Yi Xian laughed, and then he pulled Qing toward the distant city. At this time, the little girl suddenly said, "Careful, there's a restriction." As soon as she spoke, Qing flicked her sleeves. Boom! In an instant, the entire city wall collapsed, along with countless mysterious black runes. In other words, with this wave of the hand, all the restrictions in the city disappeared in an instant. Seeing this scene, the little girl collapsed to the ground, paralyzed. Oh my! After entering the city, Yi Xian found that the city was in ruins. Not only that, but there were corpses everywhere on the streets. Some of the corpses were intact, but others were piles of bones. It's been too long. Holding Qing hand tightly, Yi Xian said softly, it seems that a terrible battle took place here. Qing glanced at the surroundings with a calm expression. Suddenly, a terrifying aura spread from the end of the street. Yi Xian frowned. This aura was the same as the one from before. Clearly, it was another spirit. Meanwhile, a figure appeared in front of Yi Xian and Qing. That figure was just about to speak when a sword suddenly flew over, and it didn't even have the chance to react before the sword pierced through the center of the figure's forehead. Chi! The shadow was instantly nailed to the roof of a house. Qing opened her palm, and a storage ring flew out of the spirit's body and into her hand. Then, she placed the ring in Yi Xian's palm. Yi Xian, at the side, the little girl looked at the woman in the plain dress with a strange expression. In the distance, the spirit suddenly cried out in horror, "Who are you?" Yi Xian smiled faintly. Yi Xian. The spirit suddenly shouted angrily, "I didn't ask you." Qing frowned and flicked her sleeves. Boom! The spirit was erased. The little girl looked at Yi Xian in silence. Qing suddenly pulled Yi Xian into the distance. Before long, Qing and Yi Xian came to a square. There was a huge stone pillar in the square, and a middle-aged man was stuck on top of it. Seeing the middle-aged man, the little girl suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Clan leader, the clan leader of the Imperial Yin tribe." Yi Xian looked at the clan leader. He had to admit that the clan leader was miserable. He had been hung like this for God knows how many years. It seemed that when the myriad races fought against the mysterious forces of the boundless universe, it was not a simple tragedy. At this moment, the chieftain of the divine Yin tribe opened his eyes slowly. He looked at Yi Xian directly. "King of the human clan." Yi Xian nodded. After a moment of silence, the clan leader said, "The human race has a successor." At this time, the little girl suddenly said, "Clan leader, does the clan leader still have hope?" Hope. The clan leader looked into the distance and laughed at himself. The clan leader has no hope. The little girl hurriedly pointed at Yi Xian. "Clan leader, let him be the clan leader. If he is the king of the clan leader will have hope." She finally understood. Although Yi Xian was not particularly powerful, the woman next to Yi Xian was really fierce. Hearing this, the clan leader looked at Yi Xian. He hesitated and was about to speak, but the little girl hurriedly said, "Clan leader, don't look at him. Look at this big sister." Yi Xian's face was filled with black lines. Hearing the little girl's words, the patriarch of the Emperor Yin tribe looked at the plain-dressed woman. Looking at the plain-dressed woman, the patriarch of the Emperor Yin tribe frowned slightly because he couldn't see through the plain-dressed woman. Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly said, "Clan leader, don't worry about it. In any case, the clan leader is already in this state. There's nothing to lose. Just let this little brother be the clan leader." The clan leader was slightly hesitant. Although the clan leader's power was gone, they still had some resources. He naturally couldn't be at ease to hand it over to someone who wasn't part of the clan. The little girl was anxious when she saw the clan leader hesitate. The little girl hurriedly said, "Clan leader, you won't get another chance if you miss this opportunity." Suddenly, the bottom of the stone pillar wriggled, and it didn't take long for a shadow to float up. A Yin spirit. This Yin spirit had a violet ribbon wrapped around his forehead, and the scythe in his hand was crimson gold. The little girl's expression suddenly changed when she saw this Yin spirit, and she ran over to Yi Xian's side. However, she seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly ran over to Qing's side. Yi Xian was speechless. The little girl spoke solemnly, "This is a high-rank spirit general. His strength is extremely terrifying." Her voice was filled with terror. She'd witnessed how terrifying a high-rank spirit general was in that battle all those years ago. A high-rank spirit general had charged into the clan leader's territory and slaughtered them like a madman. It was a massacre. That scene had become a nightmare that she couldn't get rid of. Qing looked at the little girl. When she saw Qing look over, the little girl hesitated for a moment before she said, "Big sister, this one is very powerful. You have to be careful." Qing nodded. "All right." Yi Xian was speechless. The high-rank spirit general suddenly spoke in a hoarse voice, "Become the king of the clan leader?" As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. "Are you sure?" Yi Xian nodded. "I'm sure." The high-rank spirit general sneered. "What right do you have?" Yi Xian thought for a moment, then held Qing's hand and waved it. "My sister." The high-rank spirit general turned to look at Qing. When he saw the walking sword hovering beside Qing, he sneered. "Woman, come, I'll let you have 3 strikes." Yi Xian was speechless. 7017K. Chapter 24:16. 3 strikes from her. Yi Xian fell silent. 3 strikes from Qing. Even if his father and big brother put together, they wouldn't dare to say that. The last person to be so arrogant was probably Tian Yi. Now, the grass on Tian Ye's grave was over 10 m tall. Yi Xian gave the high-rank spirit general a thumbs up. "I admire your courage." As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and turned to look at Qing. "Qing, why can't they sense how strong you are?" Qing thought for a moment and said, "I'm too weak." "Too weak." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Qing is an eternal god." The corners of Qing's mouth curled up slightly when she heard this, and it was truly a peerlessly beautiful smile. Yi Xian was stunned by this sight. A short moment later, he lightly stroked Qing's face and said softly, "Qing, you can smile more." Qing gazed at Yi Xian. "I only smile at you." Yi Xian roared with laughter, and his heart was warm like a sunny day. "Too weak?" Meanwhile, the high-rank spirit general spoke abruptly. "Woman, are you talking about me?" Qing gazed at the high-rank spirit general. In the next moment, a sword suddenly pierced through the high-rank spirit general's forehead. Hiss! In an instant, the high-rank spirit general's body was nailed to the spot, and he was unable to move. The high-rank spirit general's mind went blank. "What's wrong with me? Who am I?" Qing gazed at the high-rank spirit general with an expressionless face. "Do you have a problem with saying you're weak?" The high-rank spirit general gazed at Qing with astonishment, and his gaze seemed as if he'd seen a ghost. He wasn't a small fry in the spirit of Yin clan, he was a high-rank spirit general. It could be said that he could be considered as an expert amongst the spirit of Yin clan. However, at this moment, he'd actually been instantly killed by a single sword strike. He didn't even have the ability to fight back. The high-rank spirit general was completely stunned. The little girl beside Yi Xian looked at the plain-dressed woman with widened eyes. Apart from shock, there was also admiration in her eyes. This was too ferocious. No matter who it was, it would only take one sword strike. At this moment, a black seal suddenly floated in front of Yi Xian. This seal was completely black and about the size of a palm. On top of the seal were 2 large words, Emperor Yin. Yi Xian glanced at the seal, and then he looked up at the patriarch of the Imperial Yin tribe. The patriarch spoke in a trembling voice, "Young friend, from now on, you are the king of my Imperial Yin tribe." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he smiled and said, "Senior, don't you want to think about it?" The patriarch of the Imperial Yin tribe hurriedly shook his head. No need to think about it. After he saw the woman in a simple dress attack, he'd already understood how terrifying she was. Not to mention a tiny high-rank spirit knight, even if he was at his peak, he would probably not be a match for her. Yi Xian was silent. The patriarch of the Imperial Yin tribe continued, "Everything of my Imperial Yin tribe is within this seal. From now onward, all members of my Imperial Een tribe must obey your orders. Yi Xian glanced at the seal, and then his eyelids twitched. He hurriedly put the seal away and spoke seriously, "Don't worry, Senior. I'll definitely lead the Imperial Een tribe to glory." The patriarch of the Imperial Een tribe glanced at the Qing and said, "I believe in you." As he spoke, his figure gradually became ethereal. Yi Xian fell silent. Many members of the Imperial Een tribe had perished at a young age. It was only a strand of consciousness that was holding on now. Now that that strand of consciousness had been exhausted, it was naturally time for it to vanish from this world. The high-rank spirit knight suddenly spoke in a trembling voice, "Who are you?" Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and glanced at the high-rank spirit knight. Yi Xian. The little girl's expression instantly became strange. The high-rank spirit knight turned to look at Yi Xian. "No." Hiss. He wasn't even able to finish speaking before he was obliterated. Qing opened her palm, and a spatial ring slowly floated into her hand. Just like before, she placed it in Yi Xian's hand. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He put the spatial ring away, and then he took a look at his current wealth. He had over 90 billion universe veins now. Previously, the human race had 40 billion time veins, and the Emperor Een tribe had more than 40 billion time veins. Adding on the storage rings that he had just obtained, he now had more than 90 billion time veins. In addition, he also had the god objects of the two races. The Imperial Een tribe had tens of thousands of divine treasures, and they had all sorts of divine treasures. Right now, he had both money and equipment. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian gazed at the little girl by his side. "Help me gather all the experts of the Imperial Een tribe in the city." The little girl hesitated for a moment and said, "It's dangerous. There are still some Een spirits in the city." Yi Xian turned to look at Qing and Qing nodded slightly. She opened her palm, and then the walk sword suddenly shot into the sky. In the next moment, the walk sword spun around and shot into the city. Bang! In an instant, countless shrill cries resounded throughout the city. This attack had eliminated all the Een spirits in the city. The little girl gazed at Qing with a trace of terror in her eyes. She couldn't imagine the strength of this woman before her. Right at this moment, a furious shout resounded from within the city. "How dare you!" As soon as the voice resounded, a figure suddenly appeared not too far away from Yi Xian Qing The figure gradually condensed, and it was a Een spirit as well. The Een spirit glared angrily at Qing "Who exactly are you?" Qing expression was calm. "Guess." Yi Xian was astounded, and then he shook his head and chuckled. Qing is really getting more and more mischievous. The Een spirit gazed at Qing and there was a trace of fear in his eyes. "You're not from the Imperial Een tribe." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly turned around and transformed into a shadow that vanished into the sky. Obviously, he'd confirmed with his eyes that this was someone he couldn't defeat. Meanwhile, Qing opened her palm, and the walk sword vanished. Hiss! In an instant, the spot where the Een spirit stood split open, and then a shrill cry resounded. After that, a strange scene appeared. The Een spirit who'd fled had suddenly appeared on the spot like a ghost, and there was a sword stuck in the center of his forehead. Yi Xian and the little girl were both struck dumb at the sight of that. The person who fled has actually appeared here again? The Een spirit seemed as if he'd seen a ghost, and he spoke with terror, "You. How could you?" Qing flicked her sleeve. Bang! The spirit disappeared. Qing opened her palm and a storage ring slowly floated into her hand. She then turned around and placed it in Yi Xian's hand. Yi Xian was speechless. The young girl glanced at Qing and said, "I'll go gather the clansmen." With that, she turned around and left. Excitement. With this woman's protection, the Emperor Een tribe would definitely rise. Yi Xian was curious. Qing what was that sword move of yours just now? Qing smiled. Slash it. Yi Xian said solemnly, I will also slash, but it will be different from yours. Qing pondered for a moment and said, there's a small gap in strength between us right now. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. A little. Qing took Yi Xian's hand and said with a smile, you're already very outstanding. Yi Xian nodded. I will work hard. Qing blinked. You don't have to work so hard. Yi Xian smiled. Why? Qing's lips curled up. I'll support you. Yi Xian. Not long after, the young girl gathered all the Emperor Yin tribe's experts in the city. There weren't many left, only less than 300 people. And these 300 people weren't very strong because the Emperor Yin tribe's true experts had almost all died in battle. The young girl led the Emperor Yin tribe's experts to Yi Xian and said, Greetings, Patriarch. With that, she took the lead and bowed deeply. However, the Emperor Yin tribe's experts gazed curiously at Yi Xian. None of them bowed, and some of them even had vigilance in their eyes. The young girl frowned when she saw this. She was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and the seal that the Patriarch of the Spirit of Yin tribe had given him appeared in his hand. He glanced at them and smiled. From this moment onward, I'm the Patriarch of the Spirit of Yin tribe. If any of you aren't convinced, then fight my younger sister first. Right, you can only fight me if you can defeat my younger sister. Qing was speechless. The young girl gazed at Yi Xian with astonishment on her face. I'm not convinced. Right at this moment, a man from the Emperor Yin tribe stepped forward, and he gazed at Qing I'll fight you. Yi Xian hurriedly pulled on Qing's hand and said softly, Don't kill him. Qing nodded. She gazed at the man who'd spoken. Can we begin? The man stared at Qing yes. Hiss. He'd only just finished speaking when a sword pierced through the center of his forehead. Qing's expression was calm. It's over. All of them were stunned. The man who'd been nailed by the sword was stunned as well. I was killed in an instant just like that? Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, Is there anyone who's dissatisfied? Dissatisfied? The expressions of all the experts from the Emperor Yin tribe became unsightly when they heard this. He'd nailed the man there with a single strike. How could anyone dare to be dissatisfied? Yi Xian smiled, so all of you have no objections? All of them exchanged glances. Yi Xian suddenly gazed at the man who'd been nailed by the sword. Do you have any objections? The man hurriedly spoke in a trembling voice, No. No objections. Yi Xian nodded, and then he opened his palm, causing the walk sword of the Tao to fly into his grasp. Yi Xian was struck dumb at the sight of this. When did the walk sword give me so much face? As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, Xiao Ta suddenly said, Young master, how could it not give you face? Big sister Tianming is here. If it dares to not give you face, then big sister Tianming will probably break it. Yi Xian was speechless. Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly said, Greetings, Patriarch. The experts of the Emperor Yin tribe gazed at the woman in a plain dress. Obviously, they felt that Qing was more suitable to be the Patriarch. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, Let me ask all of you a question. If even the younger sister is so strong, then the older brother. Think about it. Qing was speechless. The experts of the Emperor Yin tribe exchanged glances, and then they hurriedly bowed deeply to Yi Xian and spoke in unison, Greetings, Patriarch. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. P.S. Sorry, the update was a bit late. I'm really sorry. Due to an unexpected situation, my computer suddenly turned blue. I ran to the internet cafe to update it. 7017K. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.